He mocked me in front of hundreds of elite guests, calling me a low-level admin clerk who leeches off taxpayer money. His fiancé turned and asked what I actually did for a living. I gave her a simple answer. The room went silent. She dropped her crystal wine glass. She realized the name she'd just heard was the exact signature on the federal asset freeze she received that morning. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to silence the people who underestimated your worth. The engagement party occupied the top floor of a Manhattan hotel overlooking the city skyline. Waiters carried trays of vintage champagne past ice sculptures and floral arrangements that cost more than my annual rent. Liam stood at the center of the room, wearing a bespoke tuxedo soaking in the admiration of the venture capitalists he invited. My parents, Thomas and Patricia, flanked him, beaming with pride at their golden child. I stood near the edge of the crowd, wearing my standard tailored gray suit. My presence was an obligation, not a celebration. Liam tapped his crystal flute with a silver spoon, drawing the attention of the room. He raised his glass to give a toast. He praised his own success, his brilliant investment fund, and his beautiful fiancée, Naomi. Naomi stood beside him in a stunning designer gown, her dark skin glowing under the chandelier light. She ran a luxury event planning firm, catering to the elite. But beneath her flawless makeup, I noticed the tension tight around her eyes. Then Liam pointed his glass at me. A patronizing smirk crossed his face. "And a special thanks to my sister Claire," he announced, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "She took a break from pushing paper to be here. She is a true public servant, a low-level admin living off our tax dollars. Give it up for the bureaucracy." A few polite chuckles rippled through the wealthy crowd. My mother gave me a look of pity, shaking her head at my plain attire. I did not flush. I did not look away. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. Naomi frowned, looking at me. She had been distracted all evening, checking her phone with frantic, nervous energy. "Liam says you work for the government," Naomi said, her voice strained. "What department do you actually work in?" I lowered my glass, meeting her gaze. "I am an administrative law judge," I replied, keeping my tone flat and precise. "I preside over financial crimes for the Securities and Exchange Commission." The color drained from Naomi's face. Her hands began to tremble. The crystal flute slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crash. The champagne pooled around her designer heels. She stared at me, terror replacing her polished confidence. She had received a federal subpoena and an emergency asset freeze order at her corporate office at 8 o'clock that morning. She recognized my name. She realized she was staring at the exact judge who signed the warrant shutting down her accounts. Liam rushed to her side, ignorant of the legal bomb that just detonated. "Naomi, what is wrong?" he asked, grabbing her arm. "She is the judge," Naomi whispered, her voice cracking. She signed the freeze order. Liam turned to me, his arrogant smirk vanishing. He looked confused, then angry. He marched toward me, lowering his voice to a harsh hiss. "I do not care what imaginary power you think you have," he ordered. "Naomi needs those accounts active for the wedding vendors. You are going to log into your little system tomorrow and shred that paperwork. Fix it, Claire." I looked at my brother, analyzing his fragile ego. "I do not shred federal warrants, Liam," I said, turning toward the exit. "Enjoy the champagne while you can afford it." I walked out of the ballroom, leaving them to choke on the panic settling over the room. The real investigation had barely started. The morning sun barely crested the Manhattan skyline as I sat at my kitchen island pouring a single cup of black coffee. The silence of my apartment offered a sharp contrast to the chaotic theater of the engagement party the night before. I wore a crisp navy blazer, preparing for a full docket of regulatory hearings. My phone rested face down on the granite counter. It vibrated once, emitting a distinct, sharp chime reserved exclusively for high-priority financial alerts. I picked up the device, expecting a routine security update from my bank. Instead, the notification displayed a severe warning from my primary credit monitoring service. A Tier 1 commercial inquiry had been executed against my Social Security number less than an hour ago. My pulse maintained a steady rhythm. In my profession, panic is a vulnerability. I opened the secure application and traced the origin of the hard credit pull. It led directly to an elite private lending firm based in Delaware. The entity specialized in high-risk short-term bridge loans. I tapped the screen, accessing the detailed underwriting file. A commercial loan application materialized on my display. The principal amount requested was $3 million. The designated purpose of the capital was listed as a short-term commercial lease for a sprawling waterfront estate in the Hamptons. It was the exact venue Naomi had been boasting about securing for their upcoming wedding. I scrutinized the digital paperwork. Liam possessed a credit score, ruined by a decade of failed ventures and unpaid credit cards. No legitimate underwriter would ever approve a $3 million loan for a man with his financial history. He required a guarantor with pristine credit and substantial verifiable income to back the toxic debt. I scrolled down to the signature block at the bottom of the promissory note. Resting neatly on the guarantor line was my full legal name. The digital ink matched the exact cursive slant of my handwriting. The forgery was meticulous. He had perfectly replicated the signature I used on official tax documents. The puzzle pieces locked together with chilling precision. My parents, Thomas and Patricia, maintained a fireproof safe in their suburban home. They kept copies of my birth certificate, my old tax forms, and my social security card. They viewed my personal information as family property. Following my refusal to unfreeze Naomi corporate accounts at the engagement party, Liam had clearly run to them complaining about my defiance. Rather than correcting their son, they enabled him. They opened their safe and provided him with the exact documents required to hijack my financial identity. They assumed I would react like a typical sister. They thought I would cry, call them in a rage, and eventually absorb the financial risk just to keep the peace. They believed my position as an administrative law judge was merely an inflated title for a glorified secretary. They failed to comprehend that my entire career revolves around dissecting fraudulent corporate structures and holding financial criminals accountable. A normal person discovering a $3 million identity theft would immediately contact the lending institution to halt the transaction. They would file a police report and trigger a standard fraud investigation. But standard procedures often result in weak consequences. If I simply canceled the loan, Liam would claim it was a misunderstanding. Thomas and Patricia would rush to his defense, insisting he meant no harm. The private lender would drop the issue to avoid bad press, and my brother would escape justice. I did not want a simple cancellation. I wanted a federal snare. I finished my coffee and headed straight to the federal courthouse. I bypassed the public entrances and used my security credentials to access the restricted judicial wing. My office was a quiet sanctuary of mahogany and leather. I booted up my secure terminal, establishing an encrypted connection to the Federal Financial Clearinghouse. This network monitors the flow of institutional capital across the country. I cross-referenced the loan application data with the internal banking routing numbers. The $3 million had already been approved by the Delaware lender. The funds were currently in transit, scheduled to hit a third-party escrow account controlled by the Hamptons Estate Management Company. I opened a specialized regulatory interface. I did not initiate a cancellation order. Instead, I drafted a targeted judicial directive. I flagged the specific routing sequence of the $3 million transfer under a special anti-money laundering surveillance protocol. This specific classification is utilized when federal authorities suspect illicit capital is being washed through real estate or high-value commercial leases. By enacting this protocol, I altered the fundamental nature of the transaction. I allowed the digital funds to leave the lender and successfully deposit into the escrow account. The money crossed state lines, escalating the action into federal jurisdiction. However, the surveillance flag initiated a silent freeze on the receiving end. The capital would appear in the venue management ledger, but the system would block any physical withdrawals or secondary transfers. The money was effectively paralyzed. I hit execute. The federal server accepted the command. The trap clicked shut. Liam and Naomi had committed wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud on a multi-million-dollar scale. They voluntarily locked themselves inside a digital cage built by the very sister they had humiliated. Later that afternoon, I took a brief recess from my docket. I opened my personal phone and checked social media. Liam had just posted a live video. He was standing on the manicured lawns of the Hamptons estate, holding a glass of champagne. Workers in the background were busy unloading luxury tents and lighting equipment from commercial trucks. He grinned at the camera, bragging to his followers about finalizing the venue contract and securing the ultimate location for his extravagant wedding. He looked triumphant. He believed he had outsmarted me, using my own credit to fund his lavish lifestyle. He was entirely oblivious to the reality of his situation. He thought the money was secure. He had no idea the escrow account was frozen under federal authority. The venue coordinators would soon attempt to withdraw the initial deposit to pay for the catering, the floral arrangements, and the equipment rentals. When those transactions bounced, the illusion of his wealth would shatter. He was throwing a party on top of a financial landmine, and the timer was ticking down. I locked my phone and returned to the bench. My brother wanted to play high-stakes financial games. I was more than willing to oblige him, but we were going to play by my rules. The initial strike was flawless. The funds were dead weight. The pressure on their fraudulent empire was about to reach a breaking point. It was only a matter of time before Naomi realized the venue money was inaccessible, and her desperation would force her to make a fatal mistake. The digital clock on my chamber desk turned to 2 in the afternoon. The alert on my secondary monitor confirmed the inevitable. The Hamptons Estate Management Company had initiated their first automated draw against the $3 million escrow account. High-end event coordinators require liquid capital to function. They need cash to pay the florists, the catering teams, the structural engineers setting up the luxury tents, and the security personnel. The federal banking system processed their withdrawal request with a swift, definitive rejection code. The terminal displayed a stark red banner, indicating the funds were restricted under federal compliance. Naomi was a veteran of the luxury event planning industry. She understood the ruthless mechanics of premium vendors. They do not accept verbal promises. They do not work on pending holds. They require cleared wires before a single silk napkin is folded or a single bottle of vintage wine is chilled. When the venue management called her to report the rejected transaction, her carefully curated world began to fracture. She could not access her own corporate accounts because of my initial freeze order from the morning. Now the fraudulent loan Liam secured using my forged identity was also paralyzed. The walls were closing in on her fabricated social standing. My personal cell phone buzzed against the polished mahogany surface of my desk. I glanced at the screen. Naomi was calling. I let the device vibrate. A minute later, she called again. I watched the caller identification flash until the screen went dark. Desperation breeds predictability. When cornered individuals who operate on greed always resort to their base instincts. Naomi and my family shared a core philosophy. They believed every person possessed a price tag and that ethical principles were just a negotiation tactic for those who lacked capital. 10 minutes after the missed calls, a new notification appeared on my screen. This alert did not originate from a federal database. It came from my personal retail banking application. I unlocked the device and opened the secure portal. A wire transfer had just cleared into my primary checking account. The amount was $50,000. I pulled up the transaction details. The origin account belonged to Naomi. Attached to the wire was a brief digital memo written with the arrogant shorthand of someone accustomed to buying their way out of inconvenience. The note read, "Early wedding gift from your sister-in-law. Go buy a better suit and fix the paperwork today." She thought she was executing a masterful power play. She assumed I was holding her accounts hostage out of petty jealousy. She believed my modest wardrobe and quiet lifestyle were symptoms of hidden resentment rather than conscious choices. In her mind, $50,000 was an irresistible temptation for a government employee. She expected me to see the money smile, delete the freeze orders, and allow her to resume her lavish wedding preparations. Naomi failed to grasp the fundamental reality of my profession. For a civilian, accepting an unsolicited gift from a family member is a personal matter. For a sitting administrative law judge, presiding over a financial investigation accepting $50,000 from the subject of that investigation is a federal crime. It falls under the strict definition of bribery of a public official. I did not feel insulted by her assumption. I felt a profound, cold clarity. She had just handed me the rope required to hang her. I did not reject the transfer. Sending the money back would erase the digital footprint and give her plausible deniability. I needed the transaction preserved in the permanent ledger. I turned away from my personal phone and faced my encrypted federal workstation. I initiated a secure connection to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Public Corruption Task Force. The protocol for a judicial officer receiving a bribe is rigid and immediate. I opened a blank evidentiary affidavit. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision. I documented the timeline of the initial freeze order placed on her event planning firm. I outlined the fraudulent $3 million loan Liam secured using my forged signature. Finally, I attached the digital receipt of the $50,000 wire transfer, including the precise timestamp and the incriminating memo. I classified the document under Title 18 United States Code Section 201, detailing the bribery of public officials and witnesses. I picked up my secure desk line and dialed the direct extension of Special Agent Miller. He served as the primary liaison for financial crimes within my jurisdiction. He answered on the second ring, his tone sharp and professional. "Judge Sterling," he greeted. "What do we have today?" "I have an active attempt to bribe a federal judicial officer," I replied, keeping my voice level. "The subject is Naomi Carter. She is currently under an asset freeze. She just wired $50,000 to my personal checking account, requesting I alter official court paperwork. I just transmitted the affidavit and the transaction hashes to your secure inbox." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on his end of the line. A moment later, he let out a low whistle. She put the request right in the memo line. He noted his voice tinged with professional disbelief. "That is a rare kind of foolish. Do you need us to move on her right now?" "Not yet," I instructed. "If we arrest her today, she will claim it was a misunderstanding between future in-laws. She will hire a crisis management team to spin the narrative. We need to secure the capital first. I need you to authorize an immediate routing diversion. Extract the $50,000 from my retail account and transfer it directly into the federal seized asset depository." Agent Miller confirmed the request. Within 3 minutes, the banking interface on my personal phone updated. The $50,000 vanished from my available balance, pulled straight into a federal holding vault. The money was now classified as evidence in an active felony investigation. The legal bomb was officially armed and ticking. Naomi sent a text message shortly after the authorities seized the funds. "Did you receive the gift?" the message read. "Call the venue and clear the hold, Claire. We have a lot of work to do before the rehearsal." She sat in her luxury office, believing she had successfully purchased a judge. She thought she was the apex predator in this negotiation, orchestrating the survival of her elite image. She did not realize she had just confessed to a severe felony, leaving a pristine paper trail leading straight to a prison cell. I ignored her text message. My attention was already shifting toward a far more critical piece of the puzzle. When the task force processed the seizure of the bribe, I received a generated receipt containing the full routing metadata of the incoming wire. I reviewed the long string of numbers, identifying the source of the $50,000. The funds did not originate from Naomi personal savings. They did not come from her event planning corporate accounts because those were already paralyzed. The routing number belonged to a corporate treasury account registered to Liam Venture Capital Firm. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the glowing monitor. The implications of that routing number were staggering. My brother ran a venture capital fund that supposedly managed investments for high-net-worth clients. A legitimate fund operates under strict fiduciary duties. Capital is earmarked for specific equity purchases, technology startups, and targeted market investments. A venture capital fund does not issue $50,000 personal wires to pay off a judge for a wedding venue dispute, unless the fund was a hollow shell. The puzzle shifted, revealing a much darker picture beneath the surface of their arrogance. Liam was not just forging my signature to secure a lease. He was commingling assets. He was using his client's investment capital as his own personal checking account. He was siphoning money from his investors to fund his fiancé bribery attempt. The engagement party, the designer suits, the waterfront Hamptons venue, they were all funded by stolen capital. I closed the bribery affidavit and opened a new blank terminal window. It was time to look into the ledger of my brother's celebrated investment firm. I needed to see exactly how much money he had stolen and who he truly owed. The routing number glowing on my monitor belonged to a corporate treasury account registered under Sterling Horizon Ventures. This was the entity Liam paraded around Manhattan high society. He marketed himself as a visionary founder managing bespoke portfolios for discerning clients. I leaned forward, resting my fingers on the keyboard of my secure terminal. The Securities and Exchange Commission maintains a proprietary database known as the Consolidated Audit Trail. It grants federal regulators unrestricted oversight into domestic equity flows. I bypassed the standard public filings and initiated a deep forensic trace on my brother's corporate ledger. The system required verification. I entered my judicial credentials. The screen shifted from standard blue to the stark black and green interface of the Advanced Analytics Terminal. I fed the Treasury routing number into the primary search field and hit execute. Financial ledgers tell a story devoid of emotion or charm. They do not care about bespoke suits or country club memberships. They only reflect the raw movement of capital. As the data populated across my dual monitors, the narrative of Liam's success dissolved into a chilling portrait of fraud. I mapped the inbound cash flow first. A legitimate venture capital fund receives bulk transfers from institutional backers or accredited high net worth individuals. Sterling Horizon Ventures showed a different pattern. The incoming wires were numerous but relatively small. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. I ran a cross-reference on the source accounts. The investors were not Manhattan billionaires. They were retired public school teachers, aging engineers, and small business owners from the tri-state area. They were individuals liquidating their lifelong retirement accounts, their hard-earned pensions, and handing the capital to Liam. He preyed on people who lacked sophisticated financial literacy, using our family name and his curated appearance to project safety. I shifted my focus to the outbound column. This is where a venture fund is supposed to deploy capital into emerging technology startups or secure equity in private companies. I scanned the disbursement logs for the past 18 months. There were 0 equity purchases. There were no startup investments. There was no portfolio. Sterling Horizon Ventures was a ghost ship. The entire operation was a textbook Ponzi scheme. Liam was taking fresh capital from new victims and using a small fraction of it to pay fake dividends to earlier investors, creating the illusion of steady returns. The vast majority of the stolen retirement funds, however, flowed directly into a network of lifestyle maintenance accounts. I tracked a sequence of 6-figure transfers, terminating in corporate accounts controlled by Naomi. He was not investing his clients' money. He was using their pensions to fund her luxury event planning firm, keeping her business afloat while she hemorrhaged cash. I found the ledger entries for his leased luxury vehicles, the monthly retainers for their high-end public relations agency, and the staggering bar tabs at exclusive Manhattan clubs. Every champagne toast, every tailored jacket, every arrogant smirk was paid for by the stolen life savings of vulnerable people. My brother was not a financial prodigy. He was a parasite wearing a silk tie. But parasites eventually exhaust their hosts. As I analyzed the velocity of the cash flow, I noticed a severe liquidity crisis developing in the most recent quarter. The influx of new investors had slowed down. The outbound expenses generated by Naomi and her relentless pursuit of social status remained astronomically high. Liam was running out of fresh capital to sustain the illusion. Then I spotted the anomaly. 4 weeks ago, a single deposit of $2 million hit the Sterling Horizon Treasury account. It did not originate from a retail bank or a retirement fund. The routing sequence traced back to an entity registered as Obsidian Holdings. I recognized the name immediately. Obsidian Holdings was not a bank. It was a shadow lending syndicate operating in the gray margins of the financial sector. They cater to desperate individuals who cannot secure traditional credit. They issue short-term bridge loans at predatory interest rates. Their underwriting process does not involve credit checks. It involves collateral and physical enforcement. Legitimate business owners do not borrow from Obsidian. Cornered animals do. I pulled the corresponding digital contract for the $2 million loan. The terms were draconian. The syndicate demanded full repayment of the principal, plus a punishing interest premium within 30 days. I checked the calendar on my desk. The maturity date was the final Friday of the current month. That was less than 2 weeks away. The penalty clauses for default did not mention civil litigation or asset seizure. Shadow syndicates do not waste time in courtrooms. When a debtor defaults on Obsidian, they bypass the legal system entirely and rely on aggressive physical collection methods. If Liam did not produce $2 million in cash by the end of the month, his curated lifestyle would end abruptly and brutally in an alleyway. I leaned back, staring at the glowing data points. The entire picture snapped into razor-sharp focus. The fraudulent $3 million venue lease. The frantic bribery attempt. The lavish engagement party. The upcoming wedding was not a celebration of love. It was a calculated exit strategy. Liam and Naomi were hosting a spectacular high society event at a sprawling Hamptons estate to gather the wealthiest individuals in their network. A wedding of that caliber generates hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash gifts. More importantly, it serves as the ultimate networking stage. Liam intended to use the fake prestige of the event to solicit one final round of investments from the wealthy attendees. He planned to drain their accounts, harvest the wedding gifts, and board an international flight before the Shadow Syndicate came to collect. They were building a golden lifeboat out of stolen money and leaving my parents, the investors, and the vendors to drown in their wake. That was why Liam forged my signature. He needed my pristine credit to secure the stage for his final grift. That was why Naomi panicked and wired the bribe. Without the venue, the illusion shatters. Without the illusion, they cannot secure the final payout. And without the payout, Liam belongs to the syndicate. I saved the entire audit trail into a secure encrypted folder on the federal server. The evidence was pristine and incontrovertible. I had the power to dismantle their operation with a single keystroke. I could freeze every remaining account, send the dossier to the tactical units, and have them arrested before dinner. But a simple arrest would allow them to play the victim. Liam would spin a narrative of a misunderstood visionary targeted by an overzealous government clerk. Thomas and Patricia would mortgage their own house to hire defense attorneys, blaming me for tearing the family apart. I needed them to face the consequences of their actions in a way that stripped away every layer of their delusion. I needed them to expose their own corruption. My desk phone chimed, breaking the quiet hum of the judicial chambers. It was an internal call from the security desk located in the main lobby of the courthouse. I picked up the receiver, pressing it to my ear. Judge Sterling, the security officer, stated his tone, tight with suppressed irritation. "We have a situation at the primary checkpoint. Your parents are here. They are demanding immediate access to your chambers. They bypassed the visitor screening line and are currently shouting at the federal marshals, claiming they have a family emergency that supersedes court protocol." I listened to the background noise filtering through the receiver. Even from 3 floors down, I could hear the muffled, shrill edge of my mother's voice, echoing off the marble walls. She was weaponizing her maternal authority, expecting the federal government to yield to her demands. Thomas was likely standing right beside her, threatening to call politicians he did not actually know. They had discovered I was ignoring Liam and Naomi, and they were here to enforce the family hierarchy. "Do not arrest them," I instructed, keeping my voice calm and measured. "Issue them temporary visitor badges and escort them to the outer reception area of my chambers. I will handle it." I placed the receiver back on its cradle. The digital forensic work was paused. The physical confrontation was arriving at my door. Liam had sent his most loyal enforcers to bully the quiet daughter into submission. They were marching into a federal building, expecting to scold a secretary. They were about to step into a kill zone. The heavy mahogany doors of my outer reception area swung open, hitting the rubber wall stops with a dull thud. Through the reinforced glass panels of my inner office, I watched two armed federal marshals step backward. They kept their hands resting near their duty belts, forming a reluctant perimeter around my parents. Thomas and Patricia Sterling did not look like individuals visiting a federal courthouse. They looked like furious aristocrats marching into a retail store to demand a refund from a subordinate employee. My mother wore a beige cashmere coat and carried a designer handbag tightly against her side. Her face was flushed tight with indignation. Beside her, my father adjusted his silk tie, his jaw set in a rigid line of pure entitlement. They glared at the marshals, treating the federal law enforcement officers like minor inconveniences blocking their path. I pressed the intercom button on my desk console. "Let them in," I instructed the security detail. The marshals stepped aside, opening the inner doors to my chambers. Thomas and Patricia stormed into the room. They did not wait for an invitation to sit. They ignored the leather guest chairs and marched directly to the edge of my desk, looming over my workspace. The quiet dignity of the judicial chambers, the federal seal mounted on the wall. The stacks of regulatory dockets, none of it registered in their minds. They only saw the daughter they had spent 3 decades conditioning to obey. "You are a cold-blooded, vindictive girl." Patricia started her voice, trembling with manufactured grief. She slammed her handbag onto the polished wood of my desk. "Your brother is trying to plan the most important day of his life, and you are sitting in this quiet little room trying to ruin him out of pure spite." Naomi is in tears. The event coordinators are threatening to walk away. "How can you do this to your own family?" I remained seated, resting my hands on top of the closed case files. I did not offer a defense. I observed the frantic energy radiating from them. They were operating under the delusion that the frozen escrow account was a personal vendetta, a simple sibling rivalry that could be resolved with a stern parental lecture. Thomas placed both hands on the edge of my desk, leaning forward to cast a shadow over my chair. "We know about the venue hold, Claire," he stated, his tone dropping into the authoritative register he used to discipline me when I was a child. "Liam told us you locked the funds. He borrowed your credit profile because his capital is tied up in complex venture investments right now. It was a temporary bridge loan. You are overreacting and embarrassing this family." He called identity theft a temporary bridge loan. He justified the forgery of my signature on a $3 million commercial contract as a simple family favor. The depth of their moral decay was staggering. "Unlock the account right now," Thomas ordered, pointing a thick finger at my computer monitor. "Log into whatever administrative portal you use and release the venue money. Liam needs to pay his vendors by 5 o'clock today." I looked up, meeting my father. Gaze. "The money is restricted under a federal anti-money laundering protocol," I explained, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. "It is not a frozen retail checking account. The transaction crossed state lines and tripped a regulatory wire. I cannot simply press a button and erase a federal hold." Thomas struck the desk with his open palm. The sharp sound echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "Do not lie to me," he bellowed, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "You signed the order. You can undo the order. You are throwing a temper tantrum because Liam teased your cheap suit at a party. You are holding $3 million hostage to extort an apology from your brother." When logic fails, individuals driven by narcissism pivot to threats. Thomas straightened his posture, crossing his arms over his chest. He prepared to deploy the ultimate weapon he believed he held over me: my reputation. "If you do not release those funds in the next 10 minutes, I am walking out of this building and calling a press conference." Thomas warned, his voice laced with cold calculation. "I will contact the legal correspondents at every major news network. I will post the entire story on social media. I will tell the world that a sitting federal judge is abusing her government authority to steal money from her own family. I will say you are trying to extort your brother venture capital firm." Patricia nodded in agreement, crossing her arms to mirror her husband. "We will file formal complaints with the Judicial Oversight Board." She added, her tone sharp and vindictive. "We will testify that you are mentally unstable and unfit for the bench. They will strip your credentials, Claire. You will lose your pension, your title, and this fancy office. You will be back to pushing paper in a cubicle where you belong. They were blackmailing a federal judge inside a United States courthouse. They were threatening to fabricate evidence to destroy my career and initiate a smear campaign to force the release of fraudulent funds. Every word leaving their mouths constituted a separate felony charge. They were handing me the exact ammunition required to guarantee they would share a cell block with their golden son. I needed to secure the evidence. I needed an undeniable record of their extortion. Judges presiding over high-stakes financial fraud and cartel money laundering are issued specialized security equipment by the Inspector General Office. Pinned beneath the left lapel of my navy blazer was a micro-digital recording device. It was the size of a standard paperclip, designed to capture pristine audio in compromised environments. I reached up, pretending to adjust the collar of my blazer. I pressed the tactile sensor hidden beneath the fabric. A faint, single vibration against my collarbone confirmed the device was actively recording. I had the audio rolling. Now, I needed to feed their egos. If I arrested them right now, they would lawyer up and the $3 million loan would remain trapped in a prolonged civil forfeiture battle. I needed Liam to voluntarily sign away his remaining rights. I needed to execute the Trojan horse contract I was already drafting in my mind. To achieve that, I had to give Thomas and Patricia the illusion of total victory. I had to become the frightened, submissive daughter they expected to see. I let my shoulders slump. I widened my eyes, allowing a flicker of manufactured panic to cross my face. I darted my gaze toward the glass doors, pretending to worry that the marshals had heard his threats. I let my breathing grow shallow, simulating the physical symptoms of severe anxiety. "Please," I whispered, letting my voice tremble. "Dad, keep your voice down." The Oversight Committee takes those allegations seriously, even if they are fabricated. They would suspend me immediately pending an investigation. I would lose everything. Thomas smiled, a cruel, satisfied expression spreading across his face. He uncrossed his arms, sensing weakness. He believed his intimidation tactics had shattered my defenses. "Then do your job," he sneered. "Fix the paperwork." "I cannot do it from this terminal." I lied, stammering slightly to sell the performance. The internal system requires a countersignature from the guarantor to release a special surveillance hold. I need Liam to sign a manual release authorization. It has to be a physical document to override the digital flag. Patricia rolled her eyes, letting out a loud sigh. "Then print the paper and bring it to him," she demanded. "He is at the house right now, trying to fix the mess you made." I nodded rapidly, looking down at my hands. "I will draft the resolution contract this afternoon," I promised, my voice small and defeated. "I will bring it to the house tonight. Just please do not call the press. Do not file the oversight complaint. I will fix the escrow account and release the funds." Thomas leaned over the desk one last time, pointing his finger directly at my face. "You be at the house by 8 o'clock, Claire. Bring the paperwork. And wear something presentable. Naomi is already stressed enough without having to look at your miserable face." "I will be there," I whispered. Thomas turned on his heel, marching toward the exit with the swagger of a conquering general. Patricia grabbed her designer handbag, offering me one final look of profound disgust before following her husband out the door. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind them, leaving the chambers in silence. I sat motionless for 10 seconds, ensuring they were out of earshot. The manufactured fear evaporated from my face, replaced by a cold, rigid focus. I reached beneath my lapel and pressed the tactile sensor a second time. The micro-recorder vibrated twice, confirming the audio file was saved and encrypted. I unlocked my computer terminal and opened a blank legal template. I had promised my parents a resolution contract. I intended to deliver exactly what they asked for. The document I was about to draft would indeed resolve the situation. It would grant the federal government the legal authority to liquidate Liam's entire hollow empire. The ambush in my office was a spectacular failure of judgment on their part. They thought they had forced my surrender. They had merely scheduled their own execution for 8 o'clock tonight. The sun had long disappeared below the horizon by the time I steered my modest sedan up the winding private driveway of Liam rented mansion. The estate sat on 3 acres of prime real estate, featuring towering marble columns and a sweeping circular motor court. I parked my car behind a row of leased European sports cars. The contrast between my practical vehicle and his fleet of fabricated luxury was stark. I turned off the ignition and retrieved a thick leather briefcase from the passenger seat. The ambient exterior lighting cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. I walked up the stone steps, feeling the heavy weight of the legal documents resting inside my bag. The heavy oak front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside smelled of expensive aged bourbon and imported cigar smoke. Laughter echoed from the formal dining room down the hall. They were not hiding. They were holding court. I walked toward the noise, my sensible heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floors. I paused in the arched doorway of the dining room, observing the scene before making my presence known. Liam sat at the head of a long mahogany table, wearing a velvet dinner jacket. He held a crystal glass of amber liquid, gesturing widely as he recounted a story. Thomas sat to his right, chuckling and swirling his own drink. Patricia rested in a plush armchair near the fireplace, scrolling through a tablet. The atmosphere was thick with unearned triumph. They were celebrating their perceived victory over the federal government. They believed the confrontation in my chambers had broken my resolve. Liam glanced toward the doorway and spotted me, standing in the shadows. His charismatic smile morphed into a sharp, condescending smirk. "Look who decided to join the real world," Liam called out, raising his glass in a mock salute. "The honorable judge has descended from her ivory tower to do some actual work for the family. Come in, Claire. Do not stand there, looking like a reprimanded secretary." I stepped into the room, keeping my expression carefully neutral. I did not react to the insult. I walked toward the long dining table and placed my leather briefcase on the polished wood. Thomas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He surveyed my plain navy blazer and standard slacks with a look of profound satisfaction. "I told you she would see reason," he remarked, looking at Liam. "Bureaucrats only understand authority. You just have to remind them who holds the real power in the room. You brought the paperwork, Claire." "I brought the resolution contract." I replied, my voice flat and professional. Patricia did not even look up from her tablet. "Make it quick," she ordered, her tone dripping with disdain. "Naomi has been crying all afternoon because the florist threatened to cancel the floral arches. You caused a staggering amount of unnecessary stress today. The least you can do is fix it quietly so we can get back to planning a proper wedding." I unlocked the brass clasps of my briefcase. The sharp metallic clicks severed the ambient noise of the room. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of legal documents printed on heavy archival paper. The file was 50 pages long. It was a dense, impenetrable wall of text. I slid the heavy stack across the mahogany table toward Liam. "This is the credit surveillance waiver," I explained, utilizing a monotonous bureaucratic drone designed specifically to induce boredom. "The Federal Clearinghouse requires a manual override to lift the anti-money laundering flag on the escrow account. Because you utilized my identity as the primary guarantor, the system generated a dual liability protocol. This document waives my administrative oversight and transfers the custodial rights of the frozen funds back to your corporate entity." Liam stared at the thick stack of paper. A flicker of genuine annoyance crossed his face. Grifters despise reading. They thrive on fast-talking emotional manipulation and superficial charm. Presented with 50 pages of single-spaced legal jargon, his attention span instantly fractured. "You expect me to read a novel tonight?" Liam scoffed, pushing the document an inch away from his crystal glass. "I pay corporate attorneys $1,000 an hour to read this kind of garbage." "Summarize it for me." I anticipated his laziness. It was the fundamental flaw in his character. He wanted the prestige of a financial titan without putting in the labor required to understand the mechanisms of wealth. "It is standard regulatory boilerplate," I lied, maintaining steady eye contact. It indemnifies the Oversight Committee and verifies that the initial capital was sourced from legitimate venture capital returns. It states that you take full legal custody of the $3 million transfer. Once you sign, the system removes the flag, and the venue coordinators can withdraw the cash by tomorrow morning. Thomas waved his hand dismissively. Just show him where to sign, Claire. We are done playing these regulatory games. Let us get this over with so we can enjoy our evening. I stepped forward and flipped past the first 40 pages of the document. The pages rustled loudly in the quiet room. I stopped at page 47. The sheet contained a dense block of text, followed by a single signature line. I retrieved a black ink pen from my blazer pocket and placed it on the table next to the paper. Sign here, I instructed, pointing to the blank line, and initial the bottom corner. Liam picked up the pen. He did not read the paragraph directly above the signature line. He did not ask to review the preceding sections. His arrogance convinced him that I was too weak to lay a trap. He believed the extortion tactics in my office had successfully neutralized any threat I posed. He leaned over the table. The pen scratched against the heavy paper in swift, jagged strokes. He signed his full legal name, sealing the ink into the fibers of the page. He added his initials to the bottom corner, just as I requested. He tossed the pen back onto the table, letting out a heavy sigh. There, he said, leaning back in his velvet jacket. The bureaucracy is satisfied. Now go log into your little terminal and release my money. I gathered the 50 pages, tapping the edges against the table to align the stack. I placed the signed contract back into my leather briefcase and secured the brass clasps. I will process the paperwork tonight, I stated, picking up the briefcase. Liam took another sip of his bourbon, waving his free hand toward the hallway. Do not let the door hit you on the way out. We have a wedding to fund. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room. I navigated the grand foyer, leaving the suffocating scent of cigar smoke behind. I stepped out into the cool night air, pulling the heavy oak doors shut. The lock clicked into place, securing them inside their fabricated sanctuary. I walked down the stone steps toward my car, carrying the briefcase like a loaded weapon. Liam had just executed his own financial death warrant. The document he signed was not a credit surveillance waiver. Such a form does not exist in the Federal Registry. The 50 pages of dense text contained the precise legal architecture of a voluntary asset liquidation proxy. It is a specialized judicial instrument utilized by the Department of Justice when dealing with severe corporate fraud. By signing his name, Liam legally verified that Sterling Horizon Ventures was operating as an unlicensed entity. He waived his constitutional right to a civil asset forfeiture hearing. He granted the federal government irrevocable consent to seize his corporate treasury, his personal retail accounts, and his leased luxury vehicles. More importantly, the contract featured an active trigger clause. The liquidation proxy would execute automatically the moment a federal indictment was unsealed. Standard financial criminals often spend years fighting the government in civil courts, using their stolen money to pay expensive defense attorneys while they drag out the legal process. Liam had just surrendered that privilege. He handed me the keys to his entire empire. When the FBI eventually arrived to place him in handcuffs, his bank accounts would drain to zero before he even reached the holding cell. He would have no defense fund. He would have no leverage. He would be left with nothing but the clothes on his back. I placed the briefcase on the passenger seat of my car and started the engine. The headlights illuminated the winding gravel driveway. The first phase of the trap was secured. My brother was legally disarmed. The next target was the woman who enabled his fraud and attempted to buy my silence. Naomi believed her problems were solved. She was preparing to host a lavish bridal event for her elite social circle. She was preparing to parade her stolen status before the world. I steered my car down the dark road, knowing the incoming storm would hit her when she felt the most secure. The afternoon sun reflected off the polished fiberglass hull of a tri-deck luxury yacht moored at the Chelsea Piers Marina. The vessel was a floating monument to excess, featuring open-air lounges, a rooftop hot tub, and a dedicated crew dressed in crisp white uniforms. Naomi had chartered the ship to host her bridal shower. She invited 50 women representing the highest echelons of Manhattan society. They were the wives of hedge fund managers, real estate heirs, and fashion executives. Naomi relied on these women to sustain her event planning business. She needed them to view her as an equal, as a woman of limitless resources who belonged in their elite circle. I walked down the wooden dock toward the boarding ramp. The attendees on the main deck wore vibrant silk dresses, designer sunglasses, and extravagant wide-brimmed hats. They sipped vintage rosé and picked at caviar hors d'oeuvres served on silver trays. I stepped onto the boarding ramp wearing a plain beige trench coat over my standard gray office suit. I wore sensible flat shoes, designed for walking across courthouse floors, not for posing on teak yacht decks. The visual contrast was stark and intentional. I did not belong in their world, and I had zero desire to blend in. My presence on the guest list was a calculated move by Naomi. She believed the $50,000 bribe she wired to my checking account had successfully secured my obedience. She assumed I drafted the release forms and unlocked the $3 million venue loan just as my parents commanded. To her, my attendance was the ultimate trophy. She wanted to parade the defeated federal judge in front of her wealthy friends, using my plain appearance to elevate her own curated glamour. Naomi spotted me stepping onto the main deck. She wore a stunning white halter dress that caught the ocean breeze. A professional photographer shadowed her every movement, snapping candid photos for her social media feeds. She smiled a bright, predatory grin and navigated through the crowd of socialites toward me. "Claire, you actually came," Naomi called out, her voice pitched loud enough to ensure the surrounding guests stopped their conversations to listen. She held a crystal glass in one hand and rested the other on her hip. "I am so glad you could take a few hours away from your little cubicle to see how the other half lives." A few of the nearby women offered polite, patronizing smiles. They inspected my beige coat, their eyes scanning for a designer label and finding nothing. Naomi took a step closer, invading my personal space. She kept the bright smile anchored to her face, but her tone dropped into a condescending whisper, meant only for me. "Liam told me you dropped off the paperwork last night," she murmured. "I knew you would eventually see reason and take the gift I sent. Smart girls know when to take the money and look the other way." She was confessing to the federal bribery charge in a crowded room, believing her wealth shielded her from consequence. She thought the system bent to the will of whoever held the most capital. I reached into the deep pocket of my trench coat. I did not bring a gift bag wrapped in glossy paper. I retrieved a thick ivory envelope sealed with dark red wax. I held it out toward her, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "I brought a contribution for your future," I stated, my voice carrying a calm, steady resonance. Naomi laughed, taking the heavy envelope from my hand. She turned toward the audience of elite women, raising the envelope high in the air. The photographer stepped forward, snapping a rapid sequence of photos. "Look!" everyone, Naomi announced, projecting her voice across the teak deck. "The groom's sister brought a special gift. Let us see what the government pays its clerks these days." She expected a check. She anticipated a modest sum she could publicly dismiss as charming, but insignificant. She broke the red wax seal with her manicured thumbnail and pulled out the folded document inside. The heavy archival paper unfolded with a crisp snap. It was not a greeting card. It bore the bold navy blue seal of the United States Department of Justice at the top center. A Level 4 corporate asset freeze is a specialized judicial instrument deployed exclusively in cases of severe financial fraud and active bribery. It does not function like a standard retail bank hold. A Level 4 mandate reaches directly into the Federal Reserve routing system. It targets the primary employer identification number of the suspected entity and neutralizes it. Any banking institution, credit card processor, or merchant service attached to that tax identification number instantly locks. The capital does not disappear, but it becomes entirely inaccessible, trapped behind a federal firewall. Naomi read the bold text printed beneath the seal. Her bright, predatory smile fractured. Her eyes darted rapidly across the dense, legal paragraphs, detailing the immediate suspension of her corporate treasury. her personal retail accounts, and her merchant processing terminals. The document explicitly cited Title 18, United States Code Section 201, referencing the exact $50,000 wire transfer she sent to my account. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, ashen hue. The heavy paper began to shake in her hands, rattling against the ocean breeze. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat seized. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden crushing terror. She finally understood that I did not take the bribe. I weaponized it. The timing of the delivery was not random. During my forensic audit of Liam Venture Capital Fund, I mapped the outbound cash flows sustaining Naomi event planning business. I analyzed the vendor payment schedules. Luxury yacht charters require a substantial upfront deposit, followed by the remaining balance paid on the day of the event prior to departing the dock. I knew the yacht management company would attempt to run her corporate credit card at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Right on schedule, the yacht director stepped out of the interior cabin. He wore a crisp navy uniform with gold epaulets. He carried a sleek black leather folio containing a mobile payment terminal. He approached Naomi, navigating through the quiet crowd of socialites. "Excuse me, Ms. Carter," the director interrupted, offering a tight professional nod. "We seem to have a routing error with the card on file for the charter balance." Naomi flinched as if struck. She shoved the federal document behind her back, hiding it from the guests. "It is just a bank glitch," she stammered, her voice tight and high-pitched. "Run it again." The director opened the leather folio. "I have run it 3 times, ma'am," he replied, his tone losing its deferential warmth. "The terminal is returning a federal compliance error code. The transaction is hard-locked. We cannot leave the dock until the balance is cleared. Do you have an alternative form of payment?" The string quartet stopped playing. The silence on the main deck was sudden and profound. In the world of Manhattan, high society, a declined credit card is not a minor inconvenience. It is a fatal symptom of insolvency. The wealthy women surrounding Naomi understood the mechanics of money. They recognized the distinct panic of a woman whose financial foundation was collapsing. Naomi dropped her crystal glass. It shattered against the teak deck, sending shards of glass and expensive rose splashing across the polished wood. She dug frantically into her designer clutch, pulling out a stack of premium credit cards. She handed a platinum card to the director. "Use this one," Naomi demanded, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The director swiped the magnetic strip through the terminal. The machine emitted a sharp, negative beep. "Declined," he stated. She handed him a black metal card. He inserted the chip. Another sharp, negative beep echoed across the deck. "Declined," he repeated, his expression hardening into stern judgment. Every account linked to her identity was paralyzed by the DOJ mandate. She possessed zero liquid capital. She was standing on a multi-million-dollar yacht, surrounded by the most powerful women in the city, and she could not afford to buy a single bottle of the water they were drinking. The social contagion of poverty is something the elite actively avoid. The wives of the hedge fund managers and real estate heirs began to step back, physically distancing themselves from Naomi. The polite smiles vanished, replaced by cold, calculating stares. Whispers rippled through the crowd. They were already drafting the text messages they would send to their husbands, detailing the spectacular collapse of the event planner they had trusted. Her reputation, the only currency she truly valued, was incinerating in real time. "This is a mistake." Naomi shrieked, her polished facade shattering entirely. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She did this. She is a government hacker. She locked my accounts out of jealousy." The accusation sounded pathetic and unhinged. Federal judges do not hack retail banks. The yacht director closed his leather folio, stepping away from the erratic woman shouting on his deck. "Ms. Carter," the director announced, projecting his voice to address the crew. "Since you cannot provide valid payment, the charter is officially canceled. I must ask you and your guests to disembark the vessel immediately." The ultimate humiliation was finalized. 50 of the most influential women in New York were being evicted from a docked boat because the host was broke. The guests did not wait for further instructions. They turned toward the boarding ramp, marching off the yacht in a swift, coordinated exodus. They walked past Naomi without offering a single word of sympathy, leaving her standing alone amid the shattered glass and abandoned caviar. I buttoned my beige trench coat, observing the wreckage of her social standing. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply delivered the reality she had tried so hard to outrun. You should have read the fine print on the venue loan, Naomi. I stated, my tone clinical and detached. Bribery is a serious offense. Enjoy the bridal shower. I turned and walked down the boarding ramp, joining the stream of departing guests. I left her trapped on the empty deck, suffocating under the weight of her ruined career and her impending federal indictment. The financial oxygen was officially cut off. Naomi was neutralized, and Liam was cornered. With his corporate treasury surrendered and his fiancé accounts frozen, the shadow syndicate debt still loomed over his head. Desperation forces predators to hunt closer to home. Liam needed $2 million in untraceable cash before the end of the month. He had exhausted every external avenue. There was only one vault left to pillage. He was about to turn his sights on the people who had protected him his entire life. The fallout from the yacht incident spread rapidly through the financial district. By early evening, Naomi was entirely excommunicated from Manhattan high society. Her elite vendors canceled her upcoming contracts, and her wealthy clients blocked her number. The illusion of her success vanished, leaving her exposed and destitute. Liam was now tethered to a sinking ship. He possessed no access to his corporate treasury. His fiancée could not secure a single line of credit. The Shadow Syndicate deadline was advancing with lethal speed. Predators possess a highly predictable behavioral pattern when cornered. They do not accept defeat, and they do not seek redemption. They turn their sights on the softest available target. I sat in the darkness of my home office, watching the city traffic flow far below my window. My secure federal terminal hummed quietly on the desk. When Liam signed the voluntary asset liquidation proxy in that dining room, he unknowingly granted the federal government full surveillance authority over his digital footprint. Every device registered to his Internet Protocol address was currently routed through an active Department of Justice monitoring node. I did not need to hunt for his next move. The system was designed to alert me the moment he made a mistake. At 11 o'clock, the terminal emitted a soft, rhythmic chime. A high-priority alert materialized on the secondary monitor. Liam had just established an encrypted connection from his home network to a major institutional brokerage firm. I leaned forward, bringing the surveillance interface into focus. I watched his keystrokes log into the remote server in real time. He was not accessing his own depleted accounts. He navigated straight to a joint retirement portal. The names registered on the header of the account profile belonged to Thomas and Patricia Sterling. My parents had spent 35 years accumulating their wealth. Thomas worked long hours in corporate management, while Patricia cultivated their flawless suburban image. They funneled every spare dollar into a robust retirement portfolio consisting of index funds, municipal bonds, and blue-chip stocks. It was a formidable nest egg designed to fund decades of comfortable living. They protected that money fiercely, refusing to help me pay off my student loans because they claimed I needed to learn the value of hard work. Yet they had freely handed the login credentials to their golden child. They trusted Liam with their financial future, believing his fabricated success made him a genius. That blind worship was about to cost them everything. I watched the screen as Liam bypassed the secondary security protocols. He did not initiate a minor withdrawal to cover a late bill. He executed a full portfolio liquidation command. The system generated a severe warning prompt. Liquidating a comprehensive retirement account prior to full maturity incurs heavy federal tax penalties and early withdrawal fees. The institutional broker required manual verification to proceed with such a destructive action. Liam did not hesitate. He typed the electronic signature, authorized the tax penalties, and confirmed the total liquidation. He was willing to incinerate 30% of their wealth just to access the remaining cash. The digital ledger updated. 35 years of careful saving converted into liquid capital in a matter of seconds. The total available balance displayed as $1.8 million. It was just enough to satisfy the shadow syndicate debt if he transferred it immediately. But Liam was not paying the syndicate. A man who steals from his own parents does not intend to settle his debts and live an honest life. He intends to run. He opened a new browser window and accessed a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange based in a non-extradition jurisdiction. The platform specialized in anonymous blockchain transfers, heavily utilized by ransomware syndicates and money launderers. He initiated a wire transfer routing the entire $1.8 million from my parents' retirement account directly into the offshore digital wallet. The federal surveillance interface on my desk began flashing a bright amber warning. The transaction was irregular and flagged for immediate review. As the administrative law judge overseeing his profile, I possessed the ultimate override authority. A single command prompt glowed in the center of my screen, requiring my input to determine the fate of the capital. Execute asset freeze. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. I had the power to stop the transfer. I could hit the enter key, and the Federal Clearinghouse would sever the connection in less than 3 seconds. The money would bounce back into the retirement account. Thomas and Patricia would wake up the next morning entirely unaware that their son had attempted to leave them destitute. I could save them. I stared at the glowing prompt, listening to the quiet hum of the computer tower. I thought about the confrontation in my chambers earlier that afternoon. I remembered my father slamming his hand on my desk, demanding I break federal law to protect his son. I remembered my mother calling me a vindictive girl, complaining about the stress I caused her precious daughter-in-law. They had marched into a United States courthouse, threatening to destroy my career and smear my reputation to ensure Liam got whatever he wanted. They had spent my entire life shielding him from the consequences of his actions. They funded his arrogance. They enabled his cruelty. They handed him my social security number to forge a commercial lease, and they handed him the keys to their own vault. They engineered the exact monster that was currently tearing their future apart. If I pressed the key and stopped the transaction, I would be stepping into the exact role they assigned me, the obedient servant cleaning up the mess. They would never learn the truth about their son. They would continue to worship him while treating me like a disposable asset. They would blame me for the eventual collapse of his venture capital firm, claiming my interference ruined his genius plans. Justice requires balance. The enablers must bear the weight of their creation. I pulled my hands away from the keyboard. I rested them on the arms of my leather chair and leaned back into the shadows. I watched the progress bar on the terminal screen fill with bright green light. The institutional broker processed the wire. The digital funds departed the domestic banking system, slipping past the regulatory checkpoints and plunging into the dark, anonymous waters of the offshore exchange. The confirmation receipt appeared on the screen. The joint retirement account balance dropped to 0. It was a flawless execution of financial patricide. Liam had stripped them of their security, leaving them with nothing but the empty suburban house they used to judge the world. He stole their past and incinerated their future, all to secure his own escape. I closed the surveillance window, feeling a profound, chilling sense of closure. The familial obligation was officially severed. I did not owe them protection, and I did not owe them my grief. They had placed all their faith in the wrong child, and the market had finally corrected their error. Liam now possessed the digital capital required to flee the country. He had the funds secured in an untraceable wallet. But he knew the voluntary asset liquidation proxy he signed in the dining room was still a looming threat. He knew I held the power to accelerate the federal indictment that would freeze his physical movements before he could reach an airport. He had the money, but he lacked the time. Cornered and desperate, Liam and Naomi realized they could not outrun my judicial authority. They had to neutralize me directly. If they could orchestrate my removal from the bench, the Department of Justice mandates would enter a temporary administrative limbo, granting them the exact window they needed to board an international flight. They had failed to intimidate me in private. Now they were preparing to launch a full-scale assault on my public reputation, dragging my career into the most vicious arena they knew. They were about to initiate a war of information, assuming they could manipulate the Federal Oversight Committee the same way they manipulated their investors. They did not realize the battlefield was already rigged. The morning air inside the federal courthouse felt different the moment I stepped out of the private elevator. The usual quiet hum of the judicial wing was replaced by a tense, suffocating stillness. My law clerk stood outside the mahogany doors of my chambers, holding a thick manila folder. He did not offer his standard morning greeting. He looked at me with a mixture of apprehension and professional distance. He informed me that my morning docket was suspended and the chief administrative law judge required my presence in the internal inspection room immediately. A summons to the inspection room meant only one thing. The Office of Professional Responsibility had intercepted a credible threat to the integrity of the bench. I handed my briefcase to my clerk and walked down the long corridor toward the executive suites. I knew exactly what initiated the summons. Liam and Naomi had reached the terminal stage of their desperation. With the Shadow Syndicate deadline looming and the offshore cryptocurrency transfer secured, they needed my judicial authority, neutralized just long enough to board their international flight. They calculated that a sudden explosive ethics investigation would force the Oversight Committee to suspend my credentials, placing the asset freeze mandates into an administrative backlog. I pushed open the heavy doors of the inspection room. The space was designed for interrogations, devoid of windows or decorative art. A long, polished conference table dominated the center. Chief Judge Harrison sat at the head of the table. He was a veteran of the Southern District, a former federal prosecutor who built his reputation dismantling organized crime syndicates. He possessed a clinical, ruthless legal mind and tolerated zero ethical ambiguity. Flanking him were two senior investigators from the Judicial Conduct Board. "Take a seat," Claire Chief Judge Harrison instructed his tone, giving away nothing. I pulled out a leather chair and sat, keeping my posture straight and my hands resting on the table. At midnight, the Oversight Committee received a coordinated data dump. Harrison began sliding a printed dossier across the table. We intercepted over 200 emails routed through proxy servers. They were sent to the Ethics Board, the Department of Justice Public Integrity Section, and several high-profile financial journalists. The emails contain a detailed narrative accusing you of gross abuse of power. One of the investigators leaned forward, tapping the dossier. The complaint alleges that you initiated a Level 4 corporate asset freeze against a luxury event planning firm purely out of familial jealousy. The narrative claims you targeted the business owner, your future sister-in-law, to extort a financial payout. The investigator paused, pulling a single sheet of paper from the stack. The author of the complaint provided digital evidence to support the extortion claim. We have a verified screenshot of a $50,000 wire transfer originating from Naomi Carter and clearing directly into your personal retail checking account yesterday afternoon. The memo line explicitly references a payment to fix official paperwork. Harrison locked his eyes onto mine. Accepting capital from the subject of an active investigation is a federal crime. If you retain those funds, your career is over and you will face indictment by noon. I need your explanation. Liam and Naomi had executed a classic smear campaign. They utilized her public relations expertise to craft a compelling narrative, painting me as a rogue, corrupt bureaucrat shaking down a legitimate business. They thought the screenshot of the cleared wire transfer was their silver bullet. They expected me to panic to deny the allegations or to beg for an internal review. They assumed the bureaucratic machinery would grind to a halt, while I defended my reputation, giving them the 48-hour window they needed to escape. They failed to understand that a competent judge does not enter a courtroom without a fully loaded evidentiary arsenal. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice in defense. I reached into the interior pocket of my navy blazer and retrieved a secure encrypted flash drive. "May I use the primary terminal?" I asked, gesturing toward the audiovisual equipment integrated into the conference table. Harrison narrowed his eyes, analyzing my complete lack of distress. He offered a single nod. I stood up and inserted the drive into the terminal port. The wall-mounted projection screen lowered from the ceiling, filling the sterile room with a harsh, white light. I bypassed the standard presentation software and pulled up the raw, unredacted files from my federal dossier. The first document flashed onto the screen. It was not a bank statement. It was the official Federal Bureau of Investigation seizure receipt. I directed their attention to the timestamps. The screen displayed the exact minute the $50,000 wire hit my retail account. Directly beneath it, the FBI log confirmed that the funds were extracted and transferred into a federal holding vault exactly 3 minutes later. I did not accept a bribe. Chief Judge, I stated, returning to my seat. I weaponized it. I forwarded the transaction hashes and an affidavit to Agent Miller in the Public Corruption Task Force. The capital is currently classified as evidence in an active felony bribery investigation against Naomi Carter. The two investigators exchanged a sharp glance. The narrative of the corrupt judge instantly shattered, replaced by the reality of a flawless sting operation. I pressed the remote, advancing to the next slide. The screen shifted, displaying a waveform audio file. This is the catalyst for their desperation, I explained. Yesterday afternoon, my parents Thomas and Patricia Sterling bypassed courthouse security and ambushed me in my chambers. They demanded I lift the asset freeze to protect their son. When I explained the legal impossibility of their request, they resorted to federal extortion. I triggered the audio playback. The pristine recording captured by my lapel microphone filled the quiet inspection room. My father's arrogant voice echoed off the walls, threatening to fabricate evidence to the media and the E-Oversight Board if I did not release the frozen $3 million escrow account. My mother's vindictive tone followed, threatening to strip my credentials and ruin my life. Harrison's jaw tightened as he listened to civilians threatening a federal officer inside a United States courthouse. As a former prosecutor, he recognized the pristine nature of the evidence. The audio was an undeniable confession to conspiracy and extortion. They attempted to leverage my career to cover up a massive fraud. I continued advancing the slides to reveal the forensic audit of Sterling Horizon Ventures. My brother operates a hollow shell entity masquerading as a venture capital fund. He forged my signature on a commercial lease to stage a high society wedding. He intended to use the event to solicit a final round of fraudulent investments before fleeing the jurisdiction. I displayed the final piece of the puzzle: the offshore routing log from the previous night. He currently owes a shadow lending syndicate $2 million. I concluded, my voice a cold, steady current. At 11 o'clock last night, he liquidated our parents' entire retirement portfolio and wired $1.8 million to an untraceable, decentralized exchange. The smear campaign launched against me is a diversion tactic. They are attempting to blind the Oversight Committee while they purchase their international plane tickets. The presentation ended. I turned off the projector, and the screen retracted into the ceiling. The inspection room plunged back into normal lighting. Silence hung over the conference table. The investigators stared at the blank wall, processing the sheer magnitude of the criminal network I had just exposed. They walked into this room prepared to strip a corrupt judge of her robes. Instead, they were handed a fully assembled prosecution file wrapped in an impenetrable chain of custody. Chief Judge Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, resting his hands on the polished wood. He looked at the FBI seizure receipt, then at the audio transcript of the extortion attempt. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He appreciated surgical precision, and he recognized a masterpiece when he saw one. The smear campaign is dead on arrival, Harrison announced, his voice carrying a lethal edge. They just added perjury and filing false federal reports to their impending indictments. You did not just survive this ambush, Claire. You built a guillotine. He turned to the lead investigator. Quarantine the anonymous emails. Lock the internal review file. I do not want a single leak indicating that we have dismissed these allegations. Let the targets believe their distraction is working. Harrison shifted his gaze back to me. The ultimate authority resided in his office, and he was ready to deploy it. You have full operational clearance, Harrison stated. Coordinate directly with Agent Miller and the tactical units. I want the arrest warrants drafted by this afternoon. You drop the net whenever you see fit. Do not leave a single dollar in their accounts. I nodded, acknowledging the command. Thank you, Chief Judge. I gathered my encrypted drive and walked out of the inspection room. The heavy doors closed behind me, sealing the fate of my family. Liam and Naomi had launched their most destructive weapon, hoping to shatter my defenses. They only succeeded in handing me the final authorization required to destroy them. I returned to my chambers and placed my briefcase on the desk. My secure cell phone began to vibrate. I looked at the glowing screen. It was an incoming video call request from Liam. He was sitting in his rented mansion, watching the clock tick down toward his shadow syndicate deadline. He believed the ethics complaint had paralyzed me. He thought I was cowering in my office, waiting to be fired. Emboldened by his own delusion, he was calling to issue his final demand. He needed physical collateral to secure his escape, and he was about to make the fatal mistake of demanding the only asset I had left. I adjusted the lapels of my navy blazer and pressed the green icon, ready to accept his ultimate surrender. I pressed the green icon on my secure terminal to accept the video call. The digital connection stabilized, replacing the federal seal on my monitor with the live feed from Liam rented mansion. The man staring back at me did not resemble the arrogant venture capitalist who had mocked my wardrobe 24 hours earlier. The bespoke velvet dinner jacket was gone. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt with the collar unbuttoned and his silk tie hanging loosely around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot and darted with frantic, erratic energy. He had the distinct hollow look of a cornered predator, realizing the trap was slowly crushing his ribs. He leaned close to the camera lens. The background behind him was a mess of empty glass bottles and scattered paperwork. He had spent the entire night pacing the floor, watching the Shadow Syndicate deadline inch closer while waiting for the Oversight Committee to execute my public ruin. He believed the anonymous emails had worked. He assumed I was currently sitting in a locked office, stripped of my judicial authority and panicking over my ruined career. "You should have answered my first call, Claire." He began, his voice carrying a harsh, desperate edge. "I know they pulled you into the inspection room this morning. I know the ethics board is drafting your suspension right now. You played a stupid game with my business, and now you are losing everything." I kept my facial expression entirely neutral. I did not correct his delusion. I sat back in my leather chair, letting him project his own fabricated reality onto the silence. The offshore cryptocurrency transfer he executed the night before was a holding maneuver. He had successfully stolen our parents' retirement funds, but decentralized digital currency requires time to tumble and clean before it can be converted into usable, untraceable cash. The Shadow Lending Syndicate did not accept pending blockchain transfers. They required physical collateral or hard currency. Liam needed a pristine liquid asset to offer the syndicate to buy himself the 48 hours necessary to board a private charter flight and vanish. He had drained his investors. He had drained his fiancé. He had drained his parents. There was only one untouched vault left in the family. "I need tangible collateral today," Liam demanded, running a shaking hand through his hair. "The venue coordinators are threatening to cancel the rehearsal, and I have corporate creditors breathing down my neck because of your little asset freeze. You own that luxury high-rise apartment in the city, free and clear. I ran the property records last night. You have $2 million in equity, sitting in a building while my wedding falls apart." He was referring to the private sanctuary I had purchased with my own savings. It was a minimalist, secure space I built to escape the toxic atmosphere of our family. He did not ask for a loan. He did not ask for a favor. He was laying claim to my home, viewing my personal property as an emergency fund, designated for his survival. "You're going to sign the property deed over to my holding company today," he instructed, pointing a finger at the webcam. "I have a private notary on standby. We will use the condo equity to secure a bridge loan and cover the vendors." I let a moment of silence stretch across the digital connection. "You want me to give you the deed to my home?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. "It is not a request." Claire Liam snapped his facade of control, slipping to reveal pure malice. "You are already facing a federal bribery investigation, thanks to Naomi wire transfer. If you do not sign that property over to me by tonight, I will forward the entire dossier to the press. I will send the financial receipts to every major news outlet in the country. I will tell them the esteemed judge extorts her own family. You will not just lose your job. You will face criminal charges. You will go to prison. He was attempting to blackmail a federal judge using the very evidence I had already weaponized against him. The sheer audacity of his threat was breathtaking. Before I could formulate a response, the camera shifted. Patricia pushed her way into the frame, standing right beside her son. My mother looked exhausted, her carefully maintained suburban elegance unraveling. Her makeup was smudged and her eyes were red from crying. She had spent the morning dealing with the fallout of the canceled bridal shower and the collapsing wedding logistics. She had no idea her golden child had already stolen her entire life savings while she slept. She still believed I was the villain causing their distress. "Claire, please," Patricia begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. She leaned toward the screen, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Stop being so selfish. Look at what you are doing to your brother. Look at what you are doing to this family." She deployed the ultimate weapon in her psychological arsenal. She weaponized maternal guilt. "We gave you everything," Patricia sobbed, gripping Liam's shoulder as if he were the victim. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You have a duty to help us when we are in trouble. Your brother needs that apartment to save his business and his marriage. You can rent a small place for a while. You do not need all that luxury. Do it for us, Claire. If you have any love left for your family, you will sign that paper today." I looked at the digital image of my mother, weeping for the son who had just ruined her. She was begging me to sacrifice my home to save the man who had secretly liquidated her 35 years of hard work. She was demanding I set myself on fire to keep her parasite warm. For 3 decades, this exact dynamic had dictated my existence. The expectation that I must always yield, always shrink, and always surrender my resources to ensure Liam remained comfortable. They believed their tears and their threats could override my sense of self-preservation. They were profoundly mistaken. The conditioned obedience was dead. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice to defend my property. I looked directly into the camera lens, meeting my brother bloodshot eyes and my mother weeping gaze. I let the silence settle over the connection, allowing them to feel the heavy, cold gravity of my stare. I gave them a slow, measured nod. "All right," I said, my voice soft but carrying a sharp, undeniable finality. "I will draft the property transfer deed this afternoon." Patricia let out a loud gasp of relief, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. "Oh, thank you, Claire," she wept, wiping her eyes. "I knew you would do the right thing. I knew you would not abandon your brother." Liam let out a long, ragged breath. The manic tension in his shoulders instantly vanished. His arrogant smirk slowly returned, replacing the primal fear that had consumed him moments before. He believed he had won. He thought he had successfully broken my spirit and secured his golden lifeboat. "Bring the paperwork to the rehearsal dinner tonight." Liam ordered, his tone shifting back to his usual condescending authority. We had to move the event. Naomi secured a private dining room at the 5-star resort out in Malibu. The investors will be there, and I need this finalized before we sit down to eat. "Do not be late, Claire." "I will be there, I promised." Liam severed the connection. The screen went dark, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the glossy monitor. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my chambers, feeling the steady, rhythmic pulse of a hunter closing in on the prey. They had delivered their final ultimatum, and I had given them the exact illusion of victory they craved. They were currently celebrating, assuming they had successfully stripped me of my assets. They thought I was spending the afternoon packing up my apartment and signing away my future. Instead, I picked up my secure desk phone and dialed the direct line to Special Agent Miller. "The trap is set," I informed him the moment he answered. "The targets are gathering tonight at the luxury resort in Malibu. They believe I am bringing them a property deed to secure their debts." Miller chuckled, a low, dry sound echoing over the encrypted line. "I assume you are not bringing a property deed, Judge." "I am bringing the execution orders," I replied, sliding open my desk drawer to retrieve the heavy brass seal of the federal court. "I want the tactical teams in position by 7 o'clock. We are not giving them a chance to negotiate, and we are not giving them a chance to run. I want the perimeter locked down before I even walk into the room." "Understood," Miller confirmed. "We will have the strike force waiting on your signal." I placed the receiver back on the cradle. I gathered the pristine federal mandates, the arrest warrants for wire fraud, the bribery indictments, and the final asset forfeiture decrees. I placed the documents inside my leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut. The time for digital surveillance and subtle maneuvering was over. Liam wanted me to step into his world and hand over my life. I was going to walk into his exclusive party and burn his entire empire to the ground. The Pacific Coast Highway wound along the jagged California coastline, illuminated only by the headlights of passing vehicles and the faint glow of the rising moon. I steered my modest sedan up the steep incline toward the most exclusive luxury resort in Malibu. The property sat on a sprawling cliffside overlooking the dark ocean. It was a sanctuary designed for billionaires and Hollywood elite, featuring private villas, infinity pools, and a cavernous marble atrium. Naomi had selected this specific venue for the rehearsal dinner to project an image of limitless wealth to her remaining vendors and Liam targeted investors. I bypassed the crowded valet line, ignoring the fleet of imported sports cars and stretch limousines. I parked in a dark corner of the overflow lot. The night air was cool, carrying the sharp scent of ocean salt, mixed with the expensive jasmine planted along the walkways. I stepped out of the vehicle, gripping the handle of my leather briefcase. The brass locks were secured, holding the federal arrest warrants and the asset forfeiture decrees. Liam expected me to walk through those doors, carrying the deed to my home. He believed he had broken my resolve. He had no idea he was inviting a federal judge into a theater of war she already controlled. I walked through the towering glass doors of the main lobby. The interior was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring a cascading indoor waterfall and a panoramic view of the dark Pacific. The guests mingling near the lobby bar wore designer evening gowns and tailored suits. I kept my beige trench coat buttoned, walking with a measured, deliberate pace toward the primary event spaces. Before I could reach the central corridor, 3 men stepped out from the shadows of a structural pillar blocking my path. They did not wear the crisp, tailored uniforms of the resort staff. They wore cheap, dark suits and carried themselves with the rigid, aggressive posture of hired muscle. Liam had burned a portion of his stolen retirement funds to hire private security contractors. He knew I was bringing a property deed worth $2 million, and he did not intend to leave the transfer up to chance. He wanted physical intimidation to ensure I signed the paperwork without hesitation. The largest of the 3 men stepped directly into my personal space, forcing me to stop. He crossed his arms over his chest, staring down at me with a practiced glare. "Miss Sterling," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly threat. "Your brother is waiting for you in the private lounge down the hall. We are going to escort you there right now. Do not make a scene." The 2 other contractors flanked me, cutting off my escape routes to the left and right. They attempted to box me in, using their physical size to enforce compliance. They expected me to shrink away from the confrontation and follow orders. A familiar voice echoed from the dimly lit corridor behind them. "Bring her back here," Liam instructed, stepping out of the private lounge. He looked far more confident than he had during our video call earlier that afternoon. The frantic panic was gone, replaced by his signature arrogant smirk. He wore a fresh tailored suit and held a leather clipboard containing a stack of legal documents. A silver pen rested in his hand. He believed he held the ultimate leverage. He thought the smear campaign and the threat of public ruin had successfully paralyzed me. "We are not doing this in the ballroom," Liam stated, pointing the silver pen at me. "The investors are already seated, and Naomi is entertaining them. We are going to walk into this private room. The notary is waiting inside. You are going to sign the property deed over to my holding company and hand over the keys to your apartment. Then you can go home and cry about it. If you refuse, I make the phone call and your career ends tonight." He stood 10 feet away, surrounded by his hired guards, projecting the illusion of absolute power. He assumed the luxury resort was neutral territory. He assumed his money bought him the right to act as the apex predator in this environment. I did not break eye contact with my brother. I did not step towards the private lounge. I reached into the pocket of my trench coat and retrieved my federal mobile device. Individuals who operate legitimate financial institutions understand that wealth is fluid and empires often crumble overnight. The luxury resort Liam chose for his rehearsal dinner was owned by a massive international hospitality conglomerate. On the surface, the property appeared pristine and highly profitable. Behind the scenes, the parent company was drowning in toxic debt. 7 days ago, the hospitality conglomerate defaulted on a 9-figure institutional loan. The commercial lenders petitioned the federal court for an immediate asset receivership to prevent the corporate directors from liquidating the property. The Securities and Exchange Commission approved the petition. I bypassed the 3 security contractors and took a single step toward a discreet marble podium located near the concierge desk. A small polished brass plaque rested on the surface, displaying a complex matrix barcode utilized specifically for internal administrative access. "What are you doing?" Liam snapped, his confident smirk faltering. "Grab her phone." The largest contractor reached out, attempting to snatch the device from my hand. I moved faster. I aligned the camera lens with the brass plaque and scanned the matrix code. The screen flashed green. A silent encrypted signal transmitted directly from my device to the central security hub located in the basement of the resort. A federal judge overseeing an asset receivership is not a standard guest. When the court assigns a judicial officer to manage a bankrupt commercial property, that judge legally assumes the role of the primary executive. I did not just have jurisdiction over the financial ledgers. I possessed total operational authority over the physical estate. Liam opened his mouth to shout another order, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden rapid sound of heavy footsteps echoing across the marble floor. A squad of 6 men descended the grand sweeping staircase, leading from the mezzanine. These men were not cheap private contractors hired off the street. They were the elite internal security force, employed by the resort. They wore immaculate dark suits, fitted with subtle communication earpieces and discreet tactical belts. They moved with military precision, fanning out across the lobby and forming a tight, impenetrable ring around me. The director of security, a tall, broad-shouldered veteran named Marcus, stepped through the perimeter. He ignored Liam entirely. He walked directly toward me, stopping 2 feet away and bowing his head in a gesture of profound professional respect. Judge Sterling Marcus announced, his voice carrying a commanding resonance that silenced the ambient chatter in the lobby. "We received your system ping. The perimeter is secure, and my team is at your disposal." Liam stared at the scene unfolding in front of him. His jaw dropped. The pen slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor and rolling away across the polished stone. He looked at Marcus, then at the 6 armed guards standing in formation around me. His brain struggled to process the sudden violent shift in the power dynamic. "What is going on here?" Liam demanded, his voice cracking. "I rented the ballroom tonight. I am a paying guest. Tell your staff to back off. She is just a government clerk. Remove her from the lobby." Marcus turned his head slowly, leveling a cold, unforgiving stare at my brother. "You do not issue orders on this property," Sir Marcus replied, his tone dropping to a lethal calm. "The parent corporation of this resort filed for federal bankruptcy protection last week. Judge Sterling is the appointed federal receiver. She holds the operational proxy for every square inch of this estate. She owns the ground you are standing on." The revelation hit Liam like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall of the corridor. The illusion of his control shattered into 1,000 pieces. He realized I did not walk into a trap. I walked into my own fortress. I controlled the building, I controlled the staff, and I controlled the exits. The private sanctuary he rented to impress his investors was currently managed by the sister he had spent his entire life degrading. "Remove these 3 unauthorized contractors from my property," I instructed, looking directly at Marcus. "If they resist the eviction process, detain them in the holding room and contact the local authorities for criminal trespassing." Marcus nodded, executing the order without hesitation. "Escort them out," he commanded his squad. The elite resort guards closed in on Liam, hired muscle. The three private contractors realized they were severely outmatched in numbers training and legal authority. They did not attempt to fight. They raised their hands in surrender, allowing the resort security to march them out the front doors and into the dark parking lot. Liam stood alone in the grand corridor. His physical protection was gone. His leverage was gone. He looked at the leather clipboard in his hands. The property deed he thought would save his life, now entirely useless. His breathing grew shallow and ragged. "You cannot do this," Liam whispered, staring at me with hollow, terrified eyes. "The syndicate deadline is tomorrow. If I do not have the collateral, they will kill me, Claire. Please." I picked up the silver pen he had dropped on the floor and placed it gently on the marble podium. "Your investors are waiting for you in the ballroom, Liam," I stated, my voice echoing through the quiet lobby. "Naomi is waiting for you. You spent 30 years building this magnificent illusion. It is time for you to walk in there and deliver your final presentation." I gripped the handle of my briefcase and stepped past him, walking down the long corridor toward the glowing lights of the primary event space. The ambush was dismantled. The perimeter was locked. It was time to step onto the main stage and execute the final judgment. The grand ballroom of the Malibu luxury resort served as a cathedral of fabricated prestige. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 30 round tables draped in heavy imported silk. Waiters in crisp white coats circulated the expansive room, pouring vintage champagne into crystal flutes and serving delicate appetizers on silver trays. The air smelled of expensive floral arrangements and roasted prime rib. Naomi stood near the center of the hall, holding court among a group of older, wealthy men. She wore a shimmering emerald evening gown, her dark skin glowing under the strategic lighting. These men were not her friends. They were the primary targets for the final round of fraudulent funding. She laughed at a joke made by a retired pharmaceutical executive, projecting the image of a woman untouched by financial distress. She assumed her yacht Humiliation was a contained incident that would not follow her to this venue. She believed the property deed Liam was supposedly securing in the lobby would solve their liquidity crisis and keep the illusion intact. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room opened. Liam stepped inside. He had spent the last 5 minutes in the corridor attempting to glue his shattered composure back together after our encounter with the resort security team. He knew he had failed to secure the collateral. He knew he was walking back into this room empty-handed while the Shadow Syndicate deadline ticked closer. He smoothed the lapels of his tailored suit jacket and forced a bright, charismatic smile onto his face. He walked into the ballroom, playing the role of the visionary founder. He greeted the venture capitalists, shaking hands and clapping shoulders with practiced ease. He lied smoothly, telling them the private equity markets were eager to back his next venture. He needed their checks tonight. He needed their capital to pay the syndicate and fund his escape flight before the federal warrants could be executed. Thomas and Patricia sat at the head table closest to the stage. My father wore a custom tuxedo, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. My mother adjusted her diamond necklace, basking in the reflected glory of her son. They smiled at the passing guests, accepting early congratulations on the upcoming wedding. They felt invincible. They thought they had successfully terrorized me into surrendering my apartment to fund this exact moment. They did not know their joint retirement account currently possessed a balance of 0. They were celebrating a wealth that no longer existed, cheering for a son who had just robbed them blind. I entered the ballroom through a side door reserved for resort staff. I stood in the deep shadows near the audiovisual control booth, ensuring I remained out of sight. The technical director of the resort stood beside me, his hands hovering over the primary mixing console. Because I held the federal receivership over the property, he followed my instructions without question. The court order granted me unrestricted access to the building infrastructure. I handed him the encrypted flash drive containing the raw evidentiary files from my federal dossier. He inserted the drive into the main server, syncing the data to the panoramic display screen hidden behind the stage curtains. The gentle clinking of silverware faded as Liam walked up the short carpeted steps to the central stage. He approached the lucite podium and adjusted the microphone. The room fell silent, offering him their undivided attention. He looked out over the sea of wealthy investors and potential marks projecting the aura of a man who held the future in his hands. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Liam began, his voice echoing smoothly through the high-end speakers. He deployed his charm, weaving a narrative of success, ambition, and exclusive opportunity. He talked about his venture capital firm, Sterling Horizon. He boasted about hypothetical returns and the elite nature of his inner circle. He pointed toward Naomi, calling her his equal partner in building their legacy. The investors nodded, taking mental notes, preparing to write heavy checks to a man who was already legally disarmed. Then Liam shifted his gaze toward our parents. He offered them a warm, rehearsed smile, holding his hands out in a gesture of deep appreciation. "We do not achieve greatness alone," Liam proclaimed, his voice swelling with manufactured emotion. "We build upon the foundation laid by those who came before us. My parents taught me the value of integrity. They taught me that family is the foundation of trust. And tonight, for my part why I want to honor that trust." I turned to the technical director and gave a single sharp nod. The execution was instantaneous. The technical director killed the primary breaker. The massive crystal chandeliers illuminating the ballroom plunged into darkness. The warm golden glow vanished, leaving the expansive room suspended in pitch-black silence. The microphone on the lucite podium emitted a sharp electronic whine before cutting out entirely. Liam tapped the dead microphone. The dull thud echoed weakly in the dark. "Hello?" he said, his unamplified voice sounding thin and panicked. "Can we get the lights back on?" The lights did not return. Instead, the motorized velvet curtains behind the stage parted with a low mechanical hum. The giant panoramic LED screen, spanning the entire back wall, flared to life. The sudden brilliant white light blinded the front rows, casting long, harsh shadows across the room. The display did not show a romantic montage of the engaged couple. It displayed a stark, high-resolution image of a federal banking ledger. The wealthy investors in the audience recognized a wire transfer routing document the moment they saw one. The text was magnified, scaling 10 feet high. At the top of the screen, the origin account displayed the names Thomas and Patricia Sterling. The account classification clearly read Joint Retirement Portfolio. A red box highlighted the execution date and time. 11 o'clock the previous night. The bottom half of the screen displayed the destination account. It was an anonymous, offshore cryptocurrency wallet. The transfer amount glowed in stark black numbers. $1.8 million? A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the dark ballroom. The venture capitalists leaned forward, squinting at the screen. They understood the mechanics of money. They were looking at a digital robbery. They were looking at a son draining his parents' life savings and routing it into an untraceable offshore haven. At the head table, Thomas dropped his glass of scotch. The heavy crystal shattered against the floorboards, but the sound was drowned out by the rising noise of the crowd. Patricia let out a soft, choked gasp, pressing her hands against her chest. She stared at the giant numbers, unable to process the betrayal. Her golden child, the son she had defended and weaponized against me, had left her destitute while she slept. Liam stood frozen at the podium, his silhouette framed by the damning evidence glowing behind him. "Turn it off," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Turn that screen off right now." The technical director ignored him. He tapped a key on the mixing board, advancing to the next file on my encrypted drive. The bank statement vanished. The screen shifted to a static black background displaying a simple audio waveform graphic. The resort surround sound system crackled to life. The speakers did not play a romantic wedding song. They broadcast a crystal-clear audio recording captured directly from my federal evidence file. The voice filling the ballroom belonged to Naomi. "Early wedding gift from your sister-in-law." Naomi voice echoed loud and distinct, reading the exact memo she attached to the $50,000 wire transfer. "Go buy a better suit and fix the paperwork today." The audio file transitioned seamlessly, playing the voicemail she had left on my phone hours later. "Claire, did you receive the $50,000 Naomi recorded voice?" demanded her tone, sharp and arrogant. "The funds cleared your checking account." Call the venue and clear the federal hold on the escrow money. We have a lot of work to do before the rehearsal. Do not make me regret paying you off." The recording ended. The silence that followed was suffocating. The elite guests, the hedge fund managers, and the corporate executives understood exactly what they just heard. Naomi Carter, the woman standing among them projecting flawless grace, had just publicly confessed to bribing a federal judge to release frozen corporate funds. She had admitted to a severe federal felony. Silver forks slipped from the hands of the stunned guests, clattering loudly against porcelain plates. The sharp metallic sounds pierced the dead quiet of the room. The investors who were prepared to hand Liam their money moments ago now backed away from their tables. They realized the entire evening was a stage-managed grift. The venture capital firm was a sham. The wealth was an illusion. The engaged couple were active criminals running from a federal investigation. I gave the technical director a final nod. He engaged the main breaker. The crystal chandeliers flared back to life, flooding the ballroom with bright, unyielding light. The giant LED screen behind the stage went dark. The sudden illumination stripped away the shadows, exposing the raw, unvarnished reality of the room. Liam gripped the edges of the lucite podium, his knuckles turning white. His face was drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. The charismatic visionary was gone. He looked like a corpse propped up on a stage. Down on the floor, Naomi stood paralyzed among the wealthy investors she had tried so hard to impress. Her emerald gown suddenly looked like a costume. The elite men she had been charming mere minutes ago now stared at her with open disgust. They stepped away from her, treating her like a toxic liability. Her flawless makeup could not hide the sheer terror widening her eyes. Her skin was pale, her jaw slacked in disbelief. The fabricated empire was reduced to ash in less than 60 seconds. The audience they needed to scam was now their jury. The parents they had robbed were sitting in the front row. The trap had sprung with lethal precision, leaving them nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The bright illumination of the crystal chandeliers acted as a starting gun. The momentary paralysis gripping the ballroom shattered, replaced by an immediate frantic exodus. The venture capitalists and corporate executives did not wait for an explanation. Men who manage millions of dollars possess a predatory instinct for legal danger. They recognized a federal crime scene, and they wanted zero proximity to the blast radius. Chairs scraped violently against the polished hardwood floor. The elite guests abandoned their expensive meals and their half-empty champagne flutes. They pulled cell phones from their tailored pockets, dialing their corporate attorneys as they marched toward the exit doors. The social currency Liam and Naomi had spent months cultivating evaporated in less than 30 seconds. Naomi did not join the retreating crowd. The audio recording of her bribery attempt was still ringing in her ears, but the image of the offshore bank transfer triggered a much more visceral reaction. She processed the data displayed on the screen with brutal clarity. Liam had liquidated his parents' retirement account to secure $1.8 million. He routed it to an untraceable offshore exchange. He was not restructuring his portfolio. He was not waiting for an influx of private equity. He was broke. He possessed no liquid capital to save her event planning business, and he had secretly secured his own escape funds, leaving her behind to face the federal indictment alone. Her polished grace dissolved into raw, feral fury. Naomi hitched up the skirt of her emerald evening gown and charged up the short, carpeted steps to the stage. Liam was still gripping the edges of the lucite podium, staring at the retreating investors. He did not see her coming. Naomi crashed into him. She grabbed the lapels of his tailored suit jacket, her manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric. "You lied to me!" Naomi shrieked, her voice echoing through the live microphone still resting on the podium. "Where is the money, Liam?" "My accounts are locked. My clients are gone. You told me you had millions in reserve. You are going to leave me here to take the fall for your fake company." Liam stumbled backward, trying to peel her hands off his jacket. He looked frantic, his eyes darting across the chaotic room. Naomi, stop," he hissed, grabbing her wrists. "People are watching. We can fix this. I have a plan." There is no plan, she screamed, striking his chest with her open palms. You are a fraud. You have nothing. Down on the floor, the reality of the situation finalized its grip on Thomas and Patricia. They sat frozen at the head table, surrounded by abandoned plates and spilled wine. The giant numerical figure of their stolen retirement fund burned into their minds. 35 years of careful saving, 35 years of waking up early, enduring corporate politics, and building a secure future wiped out by a single keystroke. Thomas pressed a hand flat against his chest. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. His face flushed with a dangerous shade of crimson before draining into a sickly gray. He attempted to stand, leaning his weight against the heavy silk tablecloth, but his knees buckled. He collapsed back into his chair, knocking over a silver water pitcher. The cold liquid spilled onto his lap, but he did not register the sensation. He stared at the empty stage where the bank statement had just confirmed his financial death. Patricia let out a low, agonizing wail. It was a sound stripped of her usual suburban elegance, a raw, guttural noise of pure grief. She reached out, grabbing her husband's arm, but she could not tear her eyes away from her golden child. The son she had worshipped, the son she had defended against every perceived slight, the son she had weaponized against her own daughter, had treated them like an emergency ATM. He had discarded them the moment his own survival was threatened. The psychological foundation of her entire life collapsed, leaving a dark, suffocating void. On the stage, Liam managed to shove Naomi away. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching the edge of a microphone cord. She fell hard against the wooden floorboards, her emerald gown tearing at the seam. Liam scanned the room, desperate to shift the narrative. His mind scrambled for a scapegoat, a designated target to absorb the blame for his crumbling empire. His bloodshot eyes swept past the fleeing investors, past his hyperventilating father, and locked onto the shadows near the audiovisual control booth. He saw me step out of the darkness. I wore my plain beige trench coat, a sharp contrast to the sea of formal evening wear surrounding me. I did not run. I did not hide. I walked down the center aisle with a slow, measured cadence. Liam raised a shaking finger, pointing directly at my face. There he gurgled his voice, amplified by the podium microphone. That is her. She did this. She is a hacker. She manipulated the banking screens. She forged that audio recording to ruin my wedding. He looked toward the resort security guards, stationed near the exits. Grab her! Liam ordered, his voice cracking under the strain of his panic. Arrest her right now. She is stealing my money. She is a criminal. The elite internal security guards did not move a single muscle. They stood in perfect formation, their hands resting calmly at their sides. They looked at Liam with cold professional indifference. They knew exactly who held the operational authority in the building, and it was not the frantic man shouting on the stage. The remaining guests who had lingered near the doors paused, turning their heads to watch me walk down the aisle. The silence in the room deepened, punctuated only by the ragged breathing of my mother and the soft clicking of my sensible shoes against the hardwood floor. I reached the front of the room. I bypassed the weeping figure of my mother and the paralyzed form of my father. I ascended the carpeted steps, moving with the calm, inevitable momentum of a falling gavel. Naomi scrambled backward across the floorboards, pulling her torn dress away from my path. She stared up at me, her previous arrogance replaced by a primal, shrinking terror. Liam stepped away from the podium. He raised his hands, palms facing outward, as if trying to physically block my advance. You cannot be here, he stammered, his chest heaving. You are just a clerk. You are supposed to be suspended. I sent the emails. I did not stop. I closed the distance between us, forcing him to back away until his shoulders hit the velvet curtains behind the stage. I stepped up to the lucite podium. I reached out and adjusted the microphone, angling it upward to meet my height. The quiet rustle of my trench coat amplified through the high-end speakers, commanding the attention of every remaining person in the cavernous hall. I looked down at the head table, meeting my father's terrified gaze. I shifted my eyes to my mother, who was covering her mouth to muffle her sobs. Finally, I looked back at my brother, cowering against the velvet curtains. I did not hack a single terminal. I stated, my voice radiating a cold surgical precision that cut through the lingering chaos. I did not forge any audio files. The digital evidence projected on that screen was pulled directly from a federal evidentiary vault. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle over the room. I am not a low-level administrative clerk. I continued, keeping my tone steady and devoid of anger. I am the federal administrative law judge presiding over the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation into Sterling Horizon Ventures. Liam let out a strangled gasp. He slid down the curtain, his legs giving out beneath him until he hit the floorboards. I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved a folded document. It was the 50-page contract Liam had signed in his dining room 24 hours earlier. I held it up under the stage lights. "You thought you were signing a simple credit waiver to release your venue funds," I informed him, looking down at his trembling form. "You did not read the fine print. You signed a voluntary asset liquidation proxy. You waived your right to a civil hearing and granted the Department of Justice irrevocable authority to seize every dollar attached to your name." The sheer magnitude of the legal trap anchored itself in their minds. The dead silence returning to the ballroom was absolute. My parents stared up at me, their eyes wide with a horrifying realization. The quiet daughter they had spent 30 years ignoring, the woman they mocked for her modest wardrobe and her sensible shoes, was not a powerless secretary. She was the architect of their financial execution. They had marched into my federal chambers, attempting to extort the very authority that governed their survival. They had blindly handed their golden child the tools to rob them, and they had begged me to sacrifice my home to fund his escape. They realized with crushing clarity that they were not victims of a hacker or a random stroke of bad luck. They had engineered their own destruction, and the daughter they trampled on held the final judgment in her hands. The ultimate payoff was delivered. The ledger was exposed, the assets were locked, and the illusions were dead. But the financial ruin was merely the civil consequence. The criminal penalty was waiting just outside the resort doors, ready to finalize the transaction. The ballroom remained suspended in a paralyzing quiet. The revelation of my federal authority hung in the air, pressing down on the remaining occupants with the weight of a concrete vault. The venture capitalists were gone. The elite vendors had fled. Only the exposed architects of this fraud remained trapped under the unforgiving glare of the crystal chandeliers. At the head table, the physical reality of his total ruin finally broke Thomas Sterling. The man who had spent 3 decades dictating the lives of everyone around him, constructing an impenetrable fortress of suburban superiority, lost his ability to stand. His legs gave way. He slid off the edge of his silk-draped chair, hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy, dull thud. The custom tuxedo he wore to celebrate his son-fake empire bunched awkwardly around his shoulders. He did not attempt to get back up. The arrogance that defined his posture for a lifetime evaporated. He crawled. My father, the corporate manager who demanded absolute obedience and ruthless ambition, dragged himself across the polished floorboards toward the edge of the stage. His hands shook violently as they gripped the edge of the lowest carpeted step. The artificial confidence he projected during the ambush in my chambers was entirely erased. Tears streamed down his aging face, cutting through the expensive cologne and the polished veneer. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. "Claire," he gasped, his voice a wet, ragged wheeze. "Please, you have to stop this. You cannot let them take everything. We are your parents. We are family. You have to save the family." He invoked the sacred covenant he had spent his entire life violating. He used the word family as a shield, hoping it would deflect the consequences of his own actions. He expected the biological connection to override the legal reality of his crimes. He believed that if he cried, if he finally showed vulnerability, I would revert to the obedient daughter programmed to absorb his pain. Patricia knelt beside him, her own designer dress, soaking up the spilled water from the overturned silver pitcher. She reached out toward my sensible shoes, her fingers trembling in the air. "We did not know," she sobbed, her voice cracking under the strain of her panic. "We did not know he took the retirement money. We have nothing left, Claire. If you freeze the accounts, we will starve. You are a judge. You have the power to fix this. Forgive him. Forgive us." I looked down at the two people who had engineered my childhood trauma. I watched them weep. I analyzed the neurological response triggering inside my own mind. I did not feel a sudden rush of hot, vindictive anger. I did not feel the suffocating guilt they were attempting to weaponize. I felt a profound, crystalline satisfaction. The emotional extortion tactics that had governed my existence for 30 years held zero leverage. I was observing a calculated market correction. The toxic debt was finally being collected. They were not crying because they realized they had abused me. They were not apologizing for treating me like a disposable asset or for enabling a predator. They were crying because their bank accounts read zero. They were mourning their money, not their morality. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking down into my father's tear-streaked face. The microphone caught the slow, steady rhythm of my breathing, broadcasting my calm authority across the empty ballroom. "You do not get to invoke the concept of family tonight, Thomas," I stated, my voice radiating a lethal, chilling calm. "Family is a structure built on mutual protection and respect. You built a financial hierarchy, and you placed me at the bottom." I paused, letting the cold reality of my words sink into his panicking mind. "When you marched into my federal chambers yesterday, you did not care about the law." I continued, holding his gaze. "You did not care that your son forged my signature on a commercial lease. You demanded I commit a federal crime to protect his illusion. You threatened to destroy my career, my reputation, and my livelihood to ensure he did not face the consequences of his own greed." Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He just shook his head, tears dripping from his chin onto his ruined silk tie. I tilted my head, mirroring the exact condescending angle he utilized during the engagement party. I retrieved the exact words he and Liam had used to humiliate me, translating their past mockery into their present execution. "You made the rules of this hierarchy very clear," I reminded them, the sound of my voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. "You said my brother is always the #1 priority. You said I am just a low-level admin. You said I belong in a cubicle pushing paper while he builds an empire." I reached into my leather briefcase, resting on the podium. I bypassed the arrest warrants and the asset forfeiture decrees. I pulled out a separate manila folder containing the civil consequences of their complicity. "The Department of Justice does not view you as victims," I informed my parents, my tone shifting into the rigid cadence of a presiding magistrate. During my forensic audit of Sterling Horizon Ventures, I reviewed the initial incorporation documents. Liam could not secure the seed capital for his fraudulent fund using his own credit. You co-signed his primary commercial loans. You listed your residential estate as the primary collateral for his corporate entity. You knowingly harbored stolen funds, and you actively engaged in a conspiracy to extort a federal officer to protect that entity. Patricia let out a sharp, terrified gasp, realizing the legal trap extended far beyond their stolen retirement accounts. By signing the voluntary asset liquidation proxy, Liam authorized the immediate federal seizure of all connected collateral, I explained, holding the manila folder over the edge of the stage. "The federal government now owns your property." I let go of the folder. The heavy stack of legal documents fell through the air, landing directly on the hardwood floor in front of Thomas' trembling hands. The pages spilled open, revealing the bold red stamps of a federal eviction notice and an involuntary bankruptcy declaration. Thomas stared at the papers. He recognized the official seals. The sprawling colonial house in Connecticut, the manicured lawns, the heated swimming pool, the physical monument to their elite status was gone. The federal authorities had already changed the locks on the gates. They were homeless. "I am just doing my paperwork," I stated, delivering the final blow with surgical detachment. "You have 24 hours to return to the property and retrieve your personal clothing under federal supervision." After that, the estate goes to public auction to pay back the investors your son defrauded." Patricia collapsed onto the floor, weeping uncontrollably into her hands. Thomas buried his face against the carpeted step, a broken, ruined man stripped of his pride, his wealth, and his sanctuary. Down on the floor, Liam watched his parents break. He remained slumped against the velvet curtains, his fraudulent life incinerated. Naomi sat paralyzed a few feet away, clutching her torn emerald gown, staring at the exit doors she could no longer afford to walk through. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I did not extend a hand to help my father stand. The era of unconditional forgiveness was over. I stepped back from the edge of the stage, returning to the lucite podium to gather my briefcase. The civil destruction was complete. The ledgers were zeroed out, and the properties were seized. But the criminal justice system demanded its own pound of flesh. The flashing red and blue lights of the incoming federal strike force began to reflect against the towering glass windows of the resort lobby, signaling the arrival of the final physical consequence. The pulsing red and blue lights of the federal strike force began to reflect against the towering glass windows of the resort lobby. The rhythmic strobing cast an eerie, unnatural glow over the shattered remnants of the rehearsal dinner. Liam saw the colored lights dancing across the high ceiling of the ballroom. The visual confirmation of his impending arrest severed the final thread of his sanity. He realized he was not just losing his fabricated wealth or his stolen venture capital. He was losing his physical freedom. The shadow lending syndicate would never get the chance to collect their debt because the United States Department of Justice was about to lock him in a concrete cell for the next 20 years. His survival instinct fractured, leaving only a hollow, primal rage. He pushed himself off the floorboards, using the velvet curtains for leverage. His eyes locked onto me, standing behind the lucite podium. He did not see a federal judge. He only saw the sister he had spent a lifetime treating as a stepping stone, the quiet girl who had just dismantled his entire universe. Liam let out a raw, guttural scream. He lunged forward, charging up the carpeted steps toward the stage. His hands formed tight fists, his face contorted into a mask of pure animalistic fury. He intended to inflict physical violence, believing that if he could just strike me, he could somehow regain control of the narrative. I did not flinch. I did not take a step back. I stood perfectly still, resting my hands on the edges of the podium. I knew the timing of the tactical units. I knew he would never reach me. Before his foot could strike the second step, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom exploded inward. The splintering crash of thick wood tearing away from brass hinges echoed like a bomb blast through the cavernous halls. The doors slammed against the walls with bone-rattling force. A coordinated entry team flooded into the room. They were not local police officers. They were 30 heavily armed tactical agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. They wore matte black Kevlar vests, combat helmets, and utility belts loaded with restraints. The letters FBI and IRS were emblazoned in stark white across their chests and backs. Federal agents do not enter a room to negotiate. They enter to dominate the space. Their heavy boots hit the hardwood floor with terrifying, synchronized precision. The resort security personnel had already cleared the perimeter, yielding the jurisdiction to the federal strike force. "Federal agents, get down on the floor," a voice roared, cutting through the chaos. Liam froze mid-stride, his fist still raised in the air. He turned his head toward the entrance. The sight of the tactical gear and the sheer number of armed personnel instantly drained the violent energy from his body. 3 agents sprinted down the center aisle, closing the distance in a matter of seconds. Liam tried to back away, but his legs tangled in the microphone cord. He stumbled. The lead agent did not give him a chance to recover. The agent hit Liam with a precise tactical tackle, driving his shoulder straight into my brother's chest. Liam flew backward, hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy, sickening thud. The breath left his lungs in a sharp rush. Before he could draw another breath, 2 more agents descended upon him. One agent pressed a heavy knee firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him flat against the floorboards. The other agent grabbed his wrists, twisting his arms behind his back with practiced, ruthless efficiency. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed in the quiet room. "Liam Sterling, you are under arrest," the lead agent stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You are charged with wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Liam pressed his cheek against the cold floor. His bespoke suit jacket was torn, his silk tie ruined. He gasped for air, his eyes wide and vacant. The visionary founder, the charismatic venture capitalist, was reduced to a subdued suspect reading his Miranda rights, while pinned under the weight of federal law enforcement. Agent Miller stepped through the shattered oak doors, walking calmly into the active crime scene. He wore a crisp, dark suit and carried a thick stack of printed warrants. He surveyed the room, locating each target with clinical detachment. He pointed toward Naomi, who was still sitting on the floor, clutching her torn emerald gown. "Secure the event planner," Miller ordered. A female FBI agent approached Naomi, holding a pair of handcuffs. Naomi scrambled backward, her designer heels scraping against the polished wood. She held her hands up in front of her face, reverting to the polished public relations persona she used to manipulate her wealthy clients. "Wait, please," Naomi pleaded, her voice trembling. "This is a massive misunderstanding. I did not do anything wrong. Liam lied to me. He hid his accounts from me. I am a victim here. I run a legitimate business." The female agent did not slow her pace. She reached down, grabbing Naomi by the wrist and pulling her to her feet. "You sent a $50,000 wire transfer to a federal judge in an attempt to buy a favorable ruling," the agent stated, spinning Naomi around. "That is not a misunderstanding, Miss Carter. That is a felony." Naomi let out a sharp cry of protest as the agent wrenched her arms behind her back. The steel cuffs locked around her wrists, biting into her skin. The emerald gown she wore to project elite status now looked like a cruel joke against the backdrop of her federal arrest. She realized her social connections and her curated image held zero value in the face of a Department of Justice mandate. She was charged with the bribery of a public official, a crime that carried a mandatory federal prison sentence. At the head table, Thomas and Patricia watched the tactical units dismantle their children. The shock of their stolen retirement funds was rapidly overshadowed by the immediate physical threat surrounding them. Two IRS agents approached the table, their faces stern and unforgiving. Thomas tried to salvage a final shred of his patriarchal authority. He gripped the edge of the table and forced himself to stand, leaning heavily on his trembling legs. He pointed a finger at the approaching agents, attempting to summon the commanding tone he used to dominate boardrooms. "You cannot do this," Thomas sputtered, his face flushed with panicked indignation. "I am a respected corporate manager. We are upstanding citizens. We have a house in Connecticut. We did not commit any fraud. My daughter is a judge. She is right there. Tell them, Claire. Tell them to back off." He looked toward the stage, expecting me to intervene. He still believed his status as my father granted him immunity. The leading IRS agent did not look at me. He looked directly at Thomas. "Your residential estate is currently under federal receivership, sir," the agent informed him, pulling a set of handcuffs from his utility belt. "And your daughter is the primary witness against you. Thomas Sterling and Patricia Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to extort a federal officer and complicity in financial fraud." Patricia screamed. It was a shrill, piercing sound that tore through her suburban elegance. She slapped her hands over her face, refusing to look as the agent grabbed her husband. Thomas tried to pull his arm away, but the agent easily overpowered the aging man, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the heavy silk tablecloth. The silver dinnerware clattered as the cuffs were secured around his wrists. Another agent gently but firmly pulled Patricia's hands away from her face, locking her wrists in front of her. The diamond necklace resting against her collarbone caught the light, a sparkling reminder of a wealthy lifestyle that had just been legally incinerated. Agent Miller walked down the center aisle, stopping at the foot of the stage. He looked up at me, offering a brief professional nod. The perimeter is secure, Judge Sterling. We have all 4 targets in custody. The transport vehicles are waiting outside. I gave him a silent nod in return. I gathered my federal documents, snapping the brass locks of my leather briefcase shut. I stepped out from behind the lucite podium and walked down the carpeted stairs. I stood in the center aisle, crossing my arms over my beige trench coat. I watched the agents pull Liam to his feet. They dragged him down the aisle, his legs dragging against the hardwood floor. They marched Naomi behind him, her tears ruining her flawless makeup. Finally, they escorted Thomas and Patricia, the 2 architects of my childhood misery, heads bowed in profound, agonizing shame. I did not step forward to block their path. I did not offer a final word of advice or a gloating remark. I simply yielded the floor and let the law take its course. The agents marched the family out of the grand ballroom and into the main lobby of the resort. The scene waiting for them outside was the ultimate execution of their social standing. The venture capitalists, the hedge fund managers, and the elite vendors who had fled the ballroom did not drive away. They lingered near the valet station, standing safely behind a perimeter tape established by the resort security. As Liam and Naomi were dragged through the glass doors into the cool ocean air, the former guests raised their cell phones. The flashing lights of dozens of cameras illuminated the dark parking lot. The elite crowd recorded every second of the perp walk. They captured the ruined velvet jacket, the torn emerald gown, and the steel handcuffs glinting under the security lights. The footage would circulate through the highest echelons of Manhattan and Los Angeles society before morning. The social death was absolute. 2 heavy armored federal transport vans sat idling in the circular motor court. The agents opened the steel-reinforced doors. They guided Liam into the dark interior of the first van, forcing him to sit on a rigid metal bench. They loaded Naomi into the opposite side. Thomas and Patricia were placed into the second vehicle, the door slamming shut with a heavy, definitive metallic boom. I walked out to the edge of the motor court, breathing in the sharp scent of the sea salt. The red and blue lights painted the surrounding palm trees in rhythmic flashes. The engines of the transport vans roared to life, their heavy tires crushing the gravel as they pulled away from the resort. They drove down the steep incline of the Pacific Coast Highway, disappearing into the night, carrying the wreckage of my bloodline straight into the waiting jaws of the federal justice system. 6 months have passed since the flashing lights of the federal transport vehicles painted the luxury resort in shades of blue and red. The Pacific breeze carries the sharp, clean scent of ocean salt across the expansive glass balcony of my Malibu penthouse. I stand at the railing, wearing a simple silk robe, holding a ceramic cup of dark espresso. The morning sun reflects off the rolling waves below, casting a brilliant light over a world that finally operates according to a balanced ledger. The chaotic noise of my past, the demanding voices, the arrogant insults, and the suffocating expectations are entirely gone. I replace them with the rhythmic, calming sound of the ocean tide. The architecture of my new life is built on a foundation of undeniable reality. The penthouse is not a temporary lease secured by fraudulent credit or a hollow shell company. It is a permanent sanctuary purchased with the legitimate returns of a quiet strategic investment portfolio I cultivated over a decade. I did not need to steal from vulnerable people to secure my view of the coastline. I merely required patience, discipline, and an intimate understanding of the financial systems my brother so foolishly attempted to manipulate. Liam is no longer a visionary founder or a charismatic venture capitalist. He is a designated number within the Federal Bureau of Prisons. During his swift and brutal trial, the federal prosecutors did not need to negotiate. The evidentiary dossier I provided eliminated any possibility of a defense. Stripped of his stolen capital, Liam was forced to rely on an overworked public defender who advised him to plead guilty to wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. The presiding judge, a colleague who despises white-collar criminals operating in her jurisdiction, handed down a non-negotiable 15-year sentence in a medium-security federal correctional institution. His daily routine offers a stark contrast to his former life of tailored velvet jackets and vintage champagne. He wakes up at 5 in the morning to the sharp metallic clang of cell doors unlocking. He wears a standard-issue khaki uniform devoid of any designer labels. He spends his days working in the prison laundry facility, earning a few cents an hour to fold rough cotton sheets. His charismatic smirk has vanished, replaced by the hollow, exhausted stare of a man who realizes his arrogance dug his own grave. Ironically, the concrete walls and razor wire fences of the federal penitentiary are the only things keeping him safe. The shadow lending syndicate he attempted to defraud still holds his $2 million marker. If he ever steps foot outside those gates, before his sentence concludes, the collection methods waiting for him will not involve a court of law. Naomi experienced her own distinct brand of systemic destruction. She avoided a prison sentence by accepting a plea agreement, turning state evidence against my brother, and offering a full confession to the bribery charge. But freedom without resources is its own specialized prison. The Department of Justice executed the Level 4 asset freeze with ruthless efficiency. The bankruptcy trustee liquidated her luxury event planning firm down to the last silver napkin ring. The government seized her corporate accounts, her personal retail checking, and her extensive collection of designer handbags to pay federal restitution to the vendors she defrauded. The elite social circles of Manhattan exiled her the moment the scandal broke. The wealthy women who once attended her yacht parties pretend she never existed, blocking her number and erasing her from their digital networks. Stripped of her status and banned for life from holding any fiduciary position, Naomi now resides in a cramped studio apartment in Queens. She works a minimum wage retail job at a discount department store, forced to wear a polyester uniform and punch a time clock. She spends her shifts scanning barcodes and arranging inventory, terrified that one of her former high society clients might walk through the sliding glass doors and recognize the fallen event planner ringing up their purchases. The most profound transformation, however, occurred within the two people who engineered the toxic dynamic of my childhood. Thomas and Patricia Sterling no longer project the flawless image of suburban aristocracy. When Liam authorized the federal liquidation proxy, he unknowingly triggered the immediate forfeiture of their sprawling Connecticut estate. The bank executed the eviction order with clinical detachment. Federal marshals stood in the driveway, watching as auctioneers carried away the antique furniture, the crystal chandeliers, and the expensive oil paintings my mother used to signify her superiority. Without their retirement funds and without their physical sanctuary, my parents descended into the harsh, unforgiving reality of the American poverty line. They relocated to a rundown boarding house on the industrial outskirts of the city. The manicured lawns and heated swimming pools are replaced by peeling wallpaper and the persistent rumble of commercial trucks passing their single dirty window. Thomas suffered a physical collapse, stripped of the pride that once fueled his authoritarian presence. He walks with a heavy shuffle, a broken patriarch who realizes he sacrificed everything for a son who viewed him merely as an emergency vault. Patricia, the woman who once looked down on my sensible shoes and plain suits, now navigates the fluorescent aisles of a discount grocery store using a government-issued electronic benefit transfer card. She relies on the federal food stamp program to survive, relying on the exact taxpayer-funded systems Liam used to mock during his engagement party toast. She keeps her head down at the checkout counter, hiding her face behind the collar of a worn-out coat, praying the cashier does not notice the tears of profound humiliation welling in her eyes. The social contagion of their poverty is absolute. Their country club friends stopped calling months ago, leaving them isolated in a prison constructed by their own blind enabling. Every Tuesday, the mail carrier delivers the physical evidence of their despair to the secure lobby of my building. The concierge brings up a stack of cheap, thin envelopes addressed to me in my father's shaky handwriting. I carry them out to the balcony, setting my espresso cup down on the glass table. I do not open them. I know exactly what the pages contain. They are filled with desperate pleas for financial salvation. They invoke the concept of family begging for forgiveness, asking me to leverage my position to rescue them from the squalor they created. They still believe their tears possess the power to extract my resources. I reach beneath the side table and pull out a heavy-duty cross-cut paper shredder. I press the power button, listening to the low mechanical hum of the steel blades spinning to life. I pick up the first envelope, feeling the cheap paper between my fingers. I feed it into the designated slot. The machine grabs the envelope, pulling it downward with a sharp, grinding noise. The pleading words, the desperate apologies, and the manufactured guilt are instantly pulverized into thousands of illegible strips of confetti. I feed the second envelope, then the third, watching the remnants of their psychological manipulation fill the plastic bin. I do not shred the letters out of anger. Anger requires emotional investment. I perform this ritual out of a deep, abiding commitment to justice. Real power is never found in screaming arguments, in frantic weeping, or in demanding fairness from people who fundamentally lack a moral compass. Power is the discipline of silence. Power is the ability to absorb the insults, map the vulnerabilities of your enemies, and draft a consequence so comprehensive they walk willingly into their own demise. The ocean breeze carries a stray piece of shredded paper over the glass railing, sending it drifting down toward the crashing waves below. I pick up my espresso, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The ghost of the frightened girl who used to sit silently at the edge of their dining table is gone, erased by the formidable architect she became. I turn their arrogance into a financial death sentence, and I now stand alone at the pinnacle of an empire they can never touch. If you are currently navigating the toxic demands of manipulative relatives, remember that you are not obligated to fund their illusions. You hold the pen that dictates the final terms of the contract. Thank you for walking through this forensic execution with me. If you are ready to stop playing the victim and start building your own untouchable fortress, subscribe to Silent Vengeance Stories for more case studies in ruthless retribution. Let them underestimate you. Then let them pay the ultimate price.